Committee, we're getting ready to start here. We were just looking at how many of our members will be on WebEx today. So, and then moving the rest of us up here to the front so that we can all see you better. And welcome to committee on this beautiful Friday morning. I heard birds chirping when I was getting gas this morning and underneath that little overhang, and I thought, spring, this is so great. We're going to begin with verbal testimony, and most of these are private citizens, and we're so pleased that you could be with us. I think one person is on WebEx. We do have 7 people. We want to allow plenty of time to ask you questions, bring you back up to the microphone. And so each person will have 3 minutes, and we'd ask that you please adhere to that time. The first person is Deb Carroll, and if I mispronounce your name, please correct me in the mic. Welcome to committee.
And if I pronounce your name wrong, excuse me. Chair Gossage, Vice Chair Concannon, Ranking Members Fost and Fost-Godin, and members of the committee. My name is Deborah Cookson Carroll. I am a foster adoptive parent for TFI, a special education teacher at the Learning Center for Special Day School in Girard with Southeast Kansas Interlocal, and a lifetime resident of Kansas. Our family and my teaching colleagues have lived in both sides of the changes in 2016. I have a master's degree in special education in kindergarten through 12th grade, and I've taught for 35 years. My family has fostered for 23 years. We've adopted 5 children, now are all adults. I have 2 biological adult children and guardianship of 2 special needs adults. The last 6 years of fostering children are completely different than my first 15 years of fostering children. And our first 5 fosters, only 1 child was a juvenile offender. She had a probation officer, a community officer who would show up at our house unscheduled to check on her. She is now 35 years old, a mother of 3 children, 1 with muscular dystrophy, honorably discharged from the United States Navy, happily married, and gainfully employed. The last 6 years have been with very violent young children and teens. These children are products of a system that tried to help but only perpetuated their trauma. For example, we had a sibling set whose mother was killed in an accident. 1 is now an addict. The sister tried to strangle me. She went to JDC, Juvenile Detention Center, and currently has lost custody of her own child. A sibling set of 3 was the result of a great-grandmother adopting them, and then she passed away from a stroke. This sibling set had compound trauma with everyone involved not knowing how to parent them. Another failed adoption. The adoptive parents went to jail. 2 of those brothers are currently still in care. 1 is an adult, 19 years old, in adult services, and the other from a second failed adoption family. I currently have 3 teen fosters from failed adoptive families that were adopted as young children. We have learned so much as educators about how to deal with trauma. The struggle for families in trauma are real, painful, and individual. We are different teachers now than we were 5 years ago. We spent hours developing relationships with children or kids and each other. We build connections for long term. The last few years, I've searched for my own professional development, for my family, and for my educational life. I have gone to conferences and purchased many books about neuroscience and trauma. Books by Bruce Perry, Stephen Porges, and Dr. Lori DeSaltz. The most powerful book I am currently reading was What Happened to You, and it's by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. Pain is real, but so is healing. The process is relational and built on connections. We each hold our own superpower. It's our own brain, and learning how to recognize the awareness, regulate, and then repair is the healthiest, safest, and most successful path to healing those traumas. educating our communities, and giving them the skills to help through our community health centers, churches, youth organizations, and schools. We know better. Now we just need to do better.
Thank you so much. And it's Senator Fausto. It's a little bit different pronunciation, but you did great on the other names. And we will be calling you up for questions here in a little bit. And to the conferees, I just want you to know that we do have, if you see us looking down, we have your written testimony. We're following along, but it's almost preferable to us that you not read it since we can see it. But if you feel more comfortable than doing that, then by all means, please read your testimony. Next, we have Devonna Young. And again, if I said it wrong, please forgive me and correct me.
Good morning, Madam Chair Gossage, Vice Chair Concannon, Ranking Member Fausto, and members of the committee. Hello, and thank you for this opportunity. My name is Devonna Young. In life, I have many roles. I'm a wife of 33 years, a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother. I have a full-time job outside of the home. I'm also an adoptive and foster parent. Growing up, I was a child of the system. As an adult, I've been a case manager. I've been foster parent for, I believe, going on 5 years. I stand before you today to represent all of those roles. I have been on all sides of the system, and I'm more than appreciative of the opportunity to share our experience in hope that it creates a change in the system that we all know is beyond broken. My dad once told me that wounds heal from the inside out. If they don't, they get worse, fester, and become a larger wound. I use this analogy when discussing the child welfare system. We have to begin to heal the system from the inside of each individual part of the system. We're all aware change needs to occur. The struggle is, where does it occur and how does it occur? Who's going to ensure change is coming? What are the consequences of change not occurring? I can assure you right now the consequences are a generation of children who are being traumatized by the very system designed to protect them. My experience as a case manager and foster home has been that there are many parts to the system. Many times it begins with PPC, police protective custody. Children are put into police protective custody, taken to juvenile intake, and placed in a temporary home until court, which is typically 72 hours. Once the first hearing has occurred, if they're placed in care, then the agencies and guardian ad litems become involved. This is where everybody gets in there. All have different roles and responsibility, and none seem to want to go outside of their comfort zone. In March 22, we were blessed to adopt 2 brothers from foster care. They have been in our home for almost 3 years. They came to us at 7 and 3 months old. We were the only placement they'd ever been in. Parental rights were terminated in July of 2021. We were the only family these children knew. We were the only adoptive resource. It seems like it should have been a quick and easy adoption, but it was anything but that. The agency failed to do many things during the time the boys were in our care as fosters. They didn't see the boys for 9 months. It took that same 9 months to get a simple signature on a form so that the oldest could start to receive SED services. He went 9 months without much needed services over a simple signature that the agency continuously failed to provide. It was only because I continued to report them higher and higher up the chain of command until I reached the top that they finally came to our home. They came 2 months in a row and began skipping months again. Again, I reported them, and instead of coming back, they chose the retaliation response. As a foster parent, the question is not, will I experience retaliation? It is, when will the retaliation come? They sent us a 30-day notice to move the boys. Their reasoning was just concerns. They had no placement in mind. They were just going to move them at the end of 30 days. We were told we were no longer considered a family for adoption. While we're good enough to foster them, the agency stated not everyone who fosters can be considered an adoptive resource.
Devonna, I'm so sorry. Your 3 minutes is up, but we will be asking you questions, and I read your testimony earlier. Thank you. And next we have Elizabeth Weiler. Weiler? There you are.
Elizabeth Weiler. Thank you, Chair Gossage and committee members, for giving me this opportunity. I am Elizabeth, and I wanted to talk to you today about the important work being done by Kansas Children's Service League to support children and their parents before neglect or abuse happens. I first met my abuser in 2013. He attracted me with his grandiose ideas of fun, his sense of humor, and his charm, so I stayed. This quickly turned into manipulation, harassment, and belligerence, so I could not leave. We eventually married. In February of 2015, I gave birth to my first child with the same man. Unfortunately, the abuse continued. My son primarily experienced neglect. My husband would let the high chair or the television babysit while he slept for hours when I was at work. There were a few occasions where the police were called on a crying baby when I was not around, but no one could say exactly what happened. In September of 2017, I gave birth to my second child, who was 6 weeks premature. My baby and I stayed in the hospital for over 20 days total, 3 hours away from home due to unexpected circumstances. At this time, my 2-year-old stayed with my mom. On the rare occasion that my husband was around, he was verbally abusive, he stole the only money I had to my name, and he was unfaithful. On November 22nd of 2017, I left my abuser. I filed a police report after a particularly vile interaction that jeopardized our safety and left my 2-year-old and I scarred. Given the circumstances, I could not start nursing school. I moved myself and my 2 children 4 hours away. I left my husband and became a single mom with an abusive ex, just like my mom and her mother before her. I felt I was living out my destiny. At the beginning of 2018, my pediatrician referred me to KCSL's program, Healthy Families. This is a community-based program that allowed a specialist to come into my home and educate me and support my parenting journey as a single mom. They attended doctor's appointments with me, they provided resources for diapers and food, and helped me form a safe plan for my children and myself when interacting with their father. They helped me to rewrite the narrative and break the cycle of generational abuse that my family had experienced. Early prevention, intervention, and awareness saved my family. The support network at KCSL helped me to realize that I could still complete nursing school even if I did have a new normal. I also realized that I needed to complete nursing school. I had overcome the most significant obstacle of my life thus far and felt that if I could accomplish this, it would show my children that they can achieve anything they wish. I completed my bachelor's in nursing in June of 2020. I rented my first apartment in March of 2021. Now I am charge nurse in a critical care unit at a level 1 trauma hospital. This year I bought a new house in Johnson County with my fiance, and we will be married on May 5th. Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, "The only person you are destined to be is the person you choose to become." I've embodied this quote. KCSL and Healthy Families have helped shown me that I am capable and I have thrived. Thank you again for allowing me to speak to you today, and thank you for investing in programs which support families like mine. I encourage you to think about helping more families before child abuse or neglect can ever occur. Today, my children are safe, I am safe, and we are safer together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And now we're going to move to Nicole de Haven.
Good morning, Madam Chair Gossage and other members of the Child Welfare Oversight Committee. I mainly just want to come today to talk about one of the issues that we found that played a pretty significant role in our case was the lack of licensing amongst caseworkers only in the child welfare part. At one point we tried to file a complaint with the BSRB, and that's when we were told that they can't do anything about it because they don't have to be licensed. So therefore we don't have any way that they have to be accountable to. And so in that experience, we experienced unethical behavior, even to the point that the day after our little girl was taken away from us, we discovered that the manager of the case team filed a report against John, saying that he was unprofessional because he told her in the time that she has no business being in this field, which she didn't because she's not qualified. But part of the thing is I'm a cosmetologist, and so we have to be licensed. And I mean, people that are assistants to us to just shampoo hair has to be licensed, but we're not in charge of somebody's life and the safety of it and the best interest and stuff like that. But why is it that the people that are supposed to help protect and help work with the children and get things better, why do they not have to be licensed? And I know that, there's an issue with workforce and stuff like that, but maybe if they can do something like a 25 question that just goes over basics of regards to policies, procedures, ethical behaviors. I mean, those were all the things that you would constantly get a different answer to if you asked. And as far as like the ability to report when you are, facing these situations, you report it to the agency, and in our experience, that goes nowhere because the agency's not going to, they're not going to admit that they have employees that are maybe not adequate enough to do the position that they had. So once again, you feel completely discouraged as a foster parent, and people eventually quit trying to report things or notify people of problems and stuff like that. So, I know it's hard, but maybe we could figure out a way to have them licensed again. Since that is a good way to show people that they know what they're doing. There's somewhat of a comprehension of what they're supposed to do correctly. And also too, that they understand the ethical part of their job. So that's mainly all I wanted to bring up today. That maybe that could be something that, could be looked at in the future. But once again, I thank you for allowing me to speak. Thank you.
Perfect timing. Thank you so much. And next we have Stacy Crowe.
My name is Stacy Crowe. I am an adoptive and foster mom of 10 years. Many of you probably know my story because I sent in emails in support of House Bill 2299, 2443, and Senate Bill 232. So a lot of you will already know the details if you've read my emails. Today I want to focus on two of our daughter's adoptions. I will begin with Sophia. Sophia is a 13-year-old girl, young lady. We took placement of her in 2019. The day that I got the call to take her, we had just been at the Ronald McDonald House. We'd been for 3 months with our son there. And we got a call the day I was packing the van to, can you take this child? My first thought was, I don't know how I can. I'm not even home, haven't been home for several months. So at that point, she said, well, we'll just take her to a hotel because we have no place to place her. We have nobody that will take her. And I was like, well, my plate's full, but I'm better than a hotel. And I do know how to advocate for her. I do know how to care for her. She has a similar disability, just with more medical as my son. So they wheeled her through my door, and the first thing she said to me, she wanted to hold our baby, because we had adopted a baby, Lucy, and she said, can I hold her? And so I put her on her lap and was helping her hold her, and she wraps her arms around her and says, I will be your big sister forever and ever. And I was just like, okay, this child must know something I don't know, because, I thought we were done adopting at that point. And so within a few weeks, we were actually asked to adopt her. And my first thought was, we had been working so hard to bring healing to Ricky that I wasn't sure how we could possibly do another special needs child financially. Unless you've done special needs children before, just the cost, the expenses are over the top. And so that is when, through some research, I found out there is an adoption subsidy exception that is out there for special needs children that can be given up to the foster rate. So I was like, well, gosh, that would solve the issue. We could adopt Sophia. And so at that point, I wondered, we had been through 7 adoptions. We had adopted Ricky, who is also special needs. We had adopted a young lady she's now 24, but we adopted her when she was 15, that is got learning disabilities and severe, and she will always be our little girl too at home. And I'd never heard of this adoption subsidy exception, never before. 7 adoptions through the foster care system, never heard it even existed. But we found out it did, and that was the first step. So from there, we stepped forward. We gave our yes to our little Sophia. In fact, we just signed APA last week. Oh, can I?
I can see on your testimony you're at your conclusion.
I will. So I just want to say that it took 2.5 years to go through the system to get the adoption subsidy exception that would meet Sophia's needs. We did finally find out in December 2022 that we did win through the judicial review. And so we have been able to adopt her. Through that, though, I just want to say that the hiring of attorneys, the fight, the battle, then the retaliation that came with fighting for it, I don't even know how to describe it. It was unbelievable.
Stacy.
But thank you very much for your time.
I'm sure we'll be calling you up with questions that you can.
And this is our beautiful little Millie.
She's adorable.
And so, thank you. And Sophia. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we have Sister, is it Theresa Bangert? Theresa? We've met, but I'm just so bad with pronouncing names. Thank you.
It's really Therese, but a lot of people say Theresa. Thank you. So, good morning, committee. I was thinking, thank you again for serving on this committee, because you've had a long week, and here you are on Friday morning to listen some more. So, this morning, I just want to make a couple points. I want the people behind me to know that I hear each person here, and these foster parents and adoptive parents have my heart. The children in the child welfare system have had my heart since 1973, when I began 9 years at St. Vincent's Home, and I began to learn what the journey of these children is. So I want to raise again one big part of child welfare, and that children faring well is really about parent welfare. I'm not saying all children can be with their parents. So all legislative policies, I believe, should take into account how that policy impacts parents, thus children, and thus families. I'm asking those of you on the committee to be a voice against policy that impacts parents, that is brought to you by organization with roots outside of Kansas. They bring in one person to testify in support, while there are 10 or more Kansas-based voices against such policy. I ask you to ask, is that policy good for Kansas kids and Kansas families? I believe that we cannot emphasize enough the work of family preservation. And the young woman that got up here and told about her journey with the agency that helped her keep her 2 children, I believe that's really important work. I walk my neighborhoods in Kansas City, Kansas, where I've lived since 1996. And it's always bothered me, the broken bottles that are in the streets. And if I can pick up a bottle and put it someplace on the lawn or carry it home, I do that. I think a broken bottle is such a vivid picture of what happens often to the children in child welfare situations. They are broken in so many pieces. And then we have to put the pieces back together, and it's really hard. So all the things that we can do to keep the children and their parents before them to have these experiences that breaks their spirit and their potential into pieces, I call on you to do that. Thank you for hearing me again, and thank you for your willingness to serve on this committee. I pray for you to have wisdom and boldness. Thank you.
And finally, we have on WebEx, Mary Bundy from Foster Care Worker. Mary, are you with us?
Yes, I am. I'd just like to thank you so much to the committee for allowing me to speak this morning. I just began working as a foster care worker in October of 2022. However, I have served foster families and their children for many years in other ways. As a foster care worker, I support our foster families in many different ways, from helping them to get paperwork to supporting them with their renewals and things that they have to do within their home to be a licensed foster home, and I would like to speak to the safety of our families today. The child welfare system is being negatively impacted by an increased amount of higher acuity children that have no other option than to be placed in foster care, which then places them in foster homes or group homes. The amount of parents who are willing to take children with these types of behaviors are very minimal, which leaves staff overwhelmed with trying to place these children, as well as homes at their maximum licensing capacity, and foster parents who are stressed due to the significant behaviors they are dealing with daily. These parents are then acquiring secondary trauma and are sometimes leaving foster care altogether. For one example, recently in my caseload, we had a child that I'll use for an example. We had a 17-year-old male that was on probation post a picture of himself on Facebook with a gun as well as ammunition, and we could tell that the picture was taken at the foster parent's home. We called the police, and they said that the only thing they could do was to search the house for the gun, which they did with no gun located. We called the probation officer and their supervisor, but said that they could not confirm when the picture was taken, and there was nothing they could do other than set up an appointment to meet with the child later that week. We were left feeling no support from these agencies that are supposed to be holding this child accountable for his actions due to the inability legally to reprimand him. We were also left trying to support a terrified foster parent who was adamant that she and the other children in her care, which she had multiple other foster children in her home, would not be safe if he re-entered the home. We were able to move placements and place the child in a different foster home after that incident. However, a month later, he came back to this foster parent's home where he had posted the pictures of himself. She did not answer the door out of fear of what he would do. 2 days after that visit, he was arrested for felony theft of a firearm and criminal use of a weapon. I believe he was booked a few days, but was then released, and I continue to see him on our placement list where he could potentially go to another foster home and be a safety risk. This child, as well as many others, are putting staff, foster families, and the community in danger. Children in foster care who commit crimes and no legal actions are taken against them feel as though they are above the law. This teaches them to engage in criminal activity, which when they continue to do so after aging out of the system, then fills our jails. Whereas if they have different actions taken against them when they commit these crimes while younger and in care, will hopefully teach them instead to not commit these crimes because they understand the ramification for their actions.
Mary, thank you so much for your thank you so much, for your testimony. Committee, I would draw your attention to 4 other written-only testimonies that we have. Kylie Connor, that are in your packet, Janelle Dubray, Megan Hosterman, and Geraldine Smith. Before we turn to questions of the conferees, I'd like to take just a moment. Some of you may have heard when I spoke on the Senate floor about my sister-in-law. It's my husband's baby sister. And Carol came to the family. We all went to church together, so I knew my husband since we were in 6th grade in Sunday school class together. His mother was our Sunday school class teacher. And later she taught the little 6 and 7-year-olds. A family came to our church, and they had 2 daughters, 6-year-old and 8-year-old. Back in my day, when you went to church, you had Sunday morning church, Sunday night church, and Wednesday night church. Some of you are nodding. So what often happened on Sunday morning was you would say, "Hey, Mom, can I go home with whoever your best friend was?" And be like, "All right, sure, that's okay with her mom." And so then you would come back to church on Sunday night. The little 6-year-old came up to my mother-in-law and said, "Can I go home with you today?" And she said, "Well, honey, is that okay with your mother?" And her mother's nodding like, "Sure." So it's like, "Well, sure, you can come home with us today." That evening when they returned to church, there were no parents. And there were no parents for months. Back in those days, they didn't know how to get a hold of anybody. They didn't have any idea. So after that first week, they thought, well, I guess we should buy this little girl some clothes. She wore pretty much the same little dress when she came to church on Sundays. They bought her clothes. Then it came time for her to enroll in school. They enrolled her in school. Things were much different back in those days. And then after several more months, and by the way, I should add, the little 8-year-old went home with her Sunday school teacher, which was my aunt. So then my aunt and my mother-in-law were best friends. They each had these little girls, not knowing what do we do now, took very good care of them, God bless them. Went back to church one Sunday, about 6 months later, and there were her parents who said, "Thank you so much for taking care of our girls. We can take them back now." And my mother-in-law said, "Oh, I'm sorry, it doesn't work like that. You cannot just abandon your children and expect you're just going to take them home today after church." So they said, "Well, can we see them once in a while? You can help. You can take care of her if you want." After they finally checked somebody, this is in Missouri, to say, we enrolled her in school. Keep in mind, they didn't even have any paperwork or anything to enroll this little girl in school back in those days. So when her name is Carol, when Carol was about 12 years old, she said, "Could I become a Gossage? Can I be adopted?" Sorry. And they adopted her. And it's so different now, and I wonder if it's better or not. Because all it took was them to say, "We've had her all this long, we've enrolled her in school, she wants to be with us." It was a matter of days, and they got the adoption paperwork. I want us to do what's best for kids and put children first. Right now, Carol is on life support. They don't expect her to live through this week with her family. And I just wanted to say that because this committee is dear to my heart. Children are dear to my heart, so I wanted to become a teacher. And we have got to take care of these vulnerable kids and do what's best for them. And now, committee, I will open this up for questions. Do you have any questions for the conferees? Representative Concannon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for sharing your story. My question is for Stacy Crowe. Hi, Stacy. You before your time ran out, you just barely talked about retaliation. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about what you went through with that?
Without crying, I'm not sure. It emotionally takes everything a parent has to fight for their children. And
it's okay if you cry. We all cry in this committee.
I'm on DCF's team. I want foster families to step forward. I want good families. I train families. I encourage families to adopt and foster. I have grandchildren that are adopted, 3. I am not against them, and I am not their enemy. But I was treated as such. And basically all we did was go to an administrative hearing. We appealed that, which the appeal is just DCF looking to see if they followed their own policy, and they've rubber stamped it. And from there, it can be taken outside of that area and put on a judicial review, and that's where we went. During that time, we had a little girl that came to us that was just a temporary, and we really had no intentions of adopting our Millie. I knew she was a little girl that was turning 10 the next day, and she was sitting in the office. And through our foster sites and stuff, you know, people are like, "We got this little kiddo, anybody? And I said, I could make a 10-year-old little girl's birthday special. Her foster mom was in the hospital with COVID. And so I drove 2 hours that night and picked her up. And when I picked her up along I-70 at a gas station, it was 10, 11 o'clock at night. I knew she was a little girl and she was turning 10. Like I said, I didn't even know her name. But when she came to me, I immediately knew she had medical issues that were severe. And I took her to the doctor. I asked first if she had any, because I was just temporary. So I just asked what diagnosis is, thinking that somebody had already taken care of this. And there was none. So I took her to the doctor. Well, through that, We've been through 3 different major surgeries. We've been through a brain surgery. We've had her skull fused to her spine, and we have straightened a 72-degree curvature of the spine. So she's fused from the top of her shoulders right up here all the way to her bum, from her skull down to about the middle of her neck. 2 weeks after the second surgery, we got a notice that they were going to move her. Against the neurosurgeon's advice, we hired an attorney. We had already been paying an attorney, so what's a little bit more? As my husband said, it's just money, honey. Do what we need to do to save this little girl. We ended up with direct placement of her. The judge gave her direct placement to us, and we were able to adopt her. And she is safe, and she is loved, and she is so wanted. And she is just absolutely the most precious little girl you would ever... We didn't know we needed a Millie, but we do. And so I actually spoke to the foster mom that was supposed to take her, and her comment, it's on my phone, I can't pull it up right this minute, so I won't be word for word. They stood in court and said that, first of all, the documents had a lot of inaccuracies and untruths that was trying to move Millie about Sophia, It's about Sophia, our little girl, other little girl that we were trying to adopt. Had a lot of inaccuracies, which the child advocate would put out. They have all the information. But anyways, I spoke with the lady that was supposed to be Deborah Pittman Lane. She was supposed to be the supposed adoptive resource they were moving her to 2 weeks after this brain surgery. I asked her, I said, I just need to know, did they tell you anything about her medical condition? And were you an adoptive resource? She says, no, I had no intentions on adopting her. I told them I only want to adopt infants and newborns. I would have never adopted her. And I said, well, did you know about her medical? And she said, I knew nothing. And so they were going to move her to this home that they claimed was an adoptive resource, which was not an adoptive resource, and pull her from her home when we had said we will keep her. Her own mother said, please do not move my little girl. She has not been happy since the day her grandma died, who had guardianship of her, custody of her. She said, my little girl hasn't been happy since she came to this home. Please do not move her. And she actually relinquished her rights and begged the judge to direct place her to our custody, and he did. So that was 2.5 years. During that, we have finally got to the point we've signed APA. We're finalizing our little Sophia soon. Millie, of course, was adopted, and life is going to be okay, and we're going to keep moving forward, and we're going to just keep... It's a big system. It's going to be hard to change things, but I beg you. Some of these families give up everything emotionally and financially for these children. And we can do better than this, and when we know to do better, we should do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy, and I appreciate you sharing that.
Okay.
Do we have any, Stacy, could you stay at the microphone for just a moment? I have a question for you, and I think there may be others. Later in your testimony, you mentioned the advocacy with the Child Advocates Office and how that was helpful to you to at least be able to see both sides as opposed to feeling like that you had been lied about, you mentioned. Could you address that for a moment?
Let's just say I like truth. And so there was many things said about us, from that we were making up medical diagnoses to, which I don't know how you make up a 72-degree curvature of a spine and need for brain surgery, or anything, or that a child's blind. I don't know how you make things up like that, but we were told that. We had more kids than our license allowed living in our home. We even had case managers looking through our closets. I know we have a hidden door somewhere, right, guys? Yeah. But anyways, she was just able to collect all the information. Her report, I will say it nicely, it was written politically correct. So, I mean, it was written in a way that, half-truths and inaccuracies in my book, my mom always called those lies. And she was able to bring those to light. And I just appreciated that because 6 times in the brief, on the judicial review, it was written we would only take the foster rate. 6 times. It was written, rewritten, rewritten, rewritten. We only wanted the foster rate, which was never true. We never asked for the foster rate ever. And I like what the judge said. Was this a copy and paste error? Let's address this because we have evidence that it wasn't true. So was this a copy and paste error? And when the DCF attorney said, well, yes, it was a copy and paste error. I'm like, 6 times? I mean, 6 times we copy and paste? I don't think so. And so the child advocate can see both sides. They can come to the truth because it is true. Sometimes your emotions get too big and we end up not really seeing the whole picture. And so there are times that a foster parent can be wrong. I mean, there are times that, where you've got too many emotions in it and we aren't seeing the whole side picture. And I know that, and I knew I could be one of those because my heart is dear to my kids. So I am glad that they looked at my side and their side and that they could come up with truth. They couldn't force them to do anything, but at least truth was brought out.
Thank you, Stacy. Committee, do we have other questions for Stacy or one of the other conferees?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Senator or Representative. Wait a minute. I have Representative Johnson. This is Senator Faustido. Yes, please ask your question.
Thank you. My question is for the first conferee.
Yes, and the first conferee is Deb Carroll.
Thank
and
you.
she's coming to the microphone, Senator Faustido.
And Madam Chair Gossage, while she's coming in this meeting, do you have anyone from law enforcement here?
I don't believe that we have anyone from law enforcement here. We do have from the departments, but not from law enforcement, Senator Faustido.
Okay, thank you. So my question for the first conferee, you mentioned your situation where one of the...
Senator Faustido, we're getting feedback. I'm going to ask what's the best way for her to do that. It appears you have 2 devices on. I've done that before, maybe watching on one and listening on the other. So we need you to turn down the volume. Can you do that, Senator Faustido?
Yes, I'm attempting to.
There we go. That's better.
How about that?
That's very well. I think so. I just heard a little bit of feedback at the end. Can you give us a 1, 2, 3?
Well, I'll get out of one and come back. Thank you.
Okay. Representative Johnson, did you have a question online? He's off. Okay. Right. We have Representative Humphreys who has a question online.
Thank you. Appreciate you letting me come by WebEx today. My question was also for Deb Carroll. Just wondering, she was able to give us a good overview, but said things need to change, and I'm just curious if she has any suggestions on what we could do to make things better.
I read my testimony to my husband, and he said the same thing. So what do we do? There is no cookie cutter program. It's got to be individualized. As Senator Gossage said, it is that relationship. Churches have to be a part of it. I'm a pastor at our church. I did a book review or book study of what happened to you, and my congregation was appalled. And they even self-reflected within their own families. Is it possible that I did trauma to my spouse? And so being aware is, trauma has become the big buzzword, but it's the treatment of trauma that needs to be, and it has to be individualized. We can't keep currently I have 4 fosters in my home, and 3 of them have lost their case managers last week. I have one that's losing her case manager this week and her supervisor. These ladies and men are overworked, overwhelmed, and trying to dig out of a mudslide. I don't have a quick answer because there can't be a quick answer. It's going to take years to go through this process of healing. It took years. The first set of kids I had were there in my home for 2 or 3 years, and they went back home or they went on to be successful. So I don't have, I don't know. For each county, for each region, it is different. The needs are different. The needs are different in Southeast Kansas than they are in Kansas City. So that's not helping you guys, but.
Thank you so much. And did you have a follow-up, Senator or Representative Humphreys?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you. And Senator Falscato, are you back on the call with us?
Okay, is that better?
Yes, it is. And there you are. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So on those same line of questions, would it be helpful if law enforcement, a lot of times we talk about the children that also contact with juvenile detention centers, and then they're in foster care. So would it be helpful if they would be in a lot of the meetings that we have, and if the conferee could say, repeat again the interaction she had with law enforcement? And then, Madam Chair, I just strongly suggest that, a lot of the stories I hear, they are kids who are in the juvenile detention center, and then they end up in foster care. And I just think law enforcement or someone from that entity should, be a part of our meetings moving forward.
I don't disagree with that. I work at a school that we have a full-time SRO officer. We have about 85 students. We have about 35 staff. And we deal with the most difficult kids in 13 school districts. So it is a tightrope that we walk between relationship and doing what I said to do when I said to do it. We do that in the home also. I've been doing this for a long time, so I have lots of relationships with agencies, and there's a big trust level with my home and even our police force in Pittsburgh, Kansas. They deal with kids differently than they used to. Now they come to support me as a foster parent instead of saying, what'd you do to piss them off? Sorry. What'd you do to make them mad? Now they say, all she's asking you to do is go to your room and calm down. She's not asking, because we're parenting. What we do is parent our children. We parent them with other parents and with agencies. So I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
If I may, just a quick follow-up. And anyone can answer this. Do we think that we give the foster children too much? I know I hear from foster parents that there are certain things if the foster kids say they don't want to do it, or do we give them too much power, I guess is the question.
And they need power. They need control because that's what's gone in their life. But it is a delicate and fragile walk we walk with even parenting your own children. We do circles. I have to make a confession here. We do circles of responsibility. We have a therapist that's very supportive of us. And so we do circles of responsibility. And the center circle is self. And then from there, it is stuff. And after that, it is friends and activities. And the outer circle is technology. The outside is freedom. But using those circles gives the kids control. And if they get really difficult, she has me shrink the circle even smaller so that sometimes they don't get to choose the clothes that they get to wear to school. And these are teenagers. I take teenagers. Sometimes they don't get to choose the food they get to eat. They eat a healthy meal, but it might not be the same meal we have. But you have to understand, these are kids that are involved in juvenile offenders, and her comment was we have to make them feel the consequence of their choices. You can't continue to steal from everyone. You can't get a job and steal. They have learned to say the right things to convince us as adults that we're doing the right thing, and it's not always what the child is thinking or doing.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Senator Falscato. We do have two other questions, and Representative Tim Johnson, formerly of Law Enforcement, is on the call. And Representative Johnson, do you have a question for us?
Yes, on the question about licensing, I don't know who would be the best choice. Daughter was a social worker, and I was under the understanding that our positions were all requiring licensed social workers. Is that correct?
And I think that question is from the De Havens, was brought up by the De Havens. Okay.
Hi, I'm not much of a talker like my wife, so please, I apologize. Oh, sorry. It used to be the case that we had to be licensed. My understanding is that since I've left the field, that has changed. Now, you're no longer requiring to be a licensed social worker to be a case manager in child welfare. I'm sorry. When we started, just to kind of give you an idea, we had the case manager, the supervisor, and oh, I'm sorry. Is that better? I'm not used to speaking in front of groups. I apologize. When we started with our first child, our case manager, our supervisor, and the director, I believe at the time, were all unlicensed. I believe that we need to have licensed staff for lots of reasons, but also to have a independent agency like the Behavior Science Regulatory Board to be able to call and look at things when outside of the agency or outside of DCF or people who are regularly have contact with one another.
Thank you. And Representative Johnson, we have a couple of other questions, and we do have the secretary here, so we will be asking those questions of the secretary regarding licensing.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. And we have Senator Holscher, and then we have Representative Howerton and Representative Ousley. Senator Holscher, are you on?
Yep. Good morning. Thank you, Chairwoman Gossage, and thank you everybody for being there. I have a question for Sister Theresa. And, as I've heard the testimony this morning, it strikes me that we're not going to fix these different situations in a couple of years because we're talking about extreme trauma often in many cases. And maybe even in some cases, we can't fix the trauma because it is so extreme. So I'm thinking about what can we do to reduce trauma? And you said something that I thought was very compelling, that child welfare is impacted by parent welfare. So what are the things from your experience that you see we could be doing to reduce trauma, through the parental unit, which obviously impacts the children?
Well, thank you for your question. The safety net in Kansas, which DCF is over, the safety net isn't out. Contracted out. The TANF support system, the SNAP support system, the child care support system, the employment training support systems, all of those are things that help. But when the SNAP application itself, if I understood correctly during one of these meetings this session, is 34 pages. You're asking a lot of people to be able to navigate all that when they already have all this trauma that's stirring around in their soul and in their spirit. So one of my favorite theologians Father Boyle, who's worked with people in poverty for 25 years, and said we should be in awe about how the poor carry their burdens than judging them for how we see them carrying their burdens.
Thank you, Sister.
And Representative Ruiz could probably answer that question also. Thank you.
We do have time for the last two questions, and we want to conclude this portion at 10 o'clock, and so we have about 2 minutes. That doesn't give us much time, and I will now move to Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Devonna Young. And while she's coming, I'd just like to point everybody to the written testimony of Janelle Debris, which I think is a very interesting testimony. It's from adoptive parent back into foster care. So it's the whole circle of this. And I'm just a little fascinated by this. I want to do a little bit more reading into that. But for you, I know 3 minutes goes really, really fast. If you wanted to make like just some closing remarks of what you think we need to do.
I think every agency involved needs to, the change has got to start like down at the bottom. We can't, I'm sorry, we can't just keep band-aiding things. We have to go all the way down to the root, and they all need to work together because we have all these different things that, like I said, nobody seems to want to step outside of their comfort zone. It's not my area, it's not my expertise. And most importantly, we need accountability. As a foster parent, I'm accountable for every single thing. But the person that stands up in court, the guardian ad litem, to make a recommendation about this child's life, typically does so without ever having met this child. And there's no accountability there. So I think accountability is the biggest one. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Representative Ousley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just kind of piggyback off of Sister Theresa's comment, child welfare is relative to parent welfare. United Community Services of Johnson County visited our delegation for a lunch hour here recently. And one of the things that was said during that meeting was a safety net doesn't do any good if it's on the ground. And that resonated with me as well as we talk about child welfare and parent welfare. I just kind of wanted to give anybody a chance to elaborate on the consequences of Senate Bill 367. As I was reading through the written testimony, it was brought up a couple of times, and I know that Senator Fascadeau touched on it a little bit, but I wanted to see if any other conferees had comments they'd like to make while we have just a minute left. If not, that's okay too.
We do have someone to respond.
Because of my relationships with all the agencies, the juvenile offenders, the agency, the community corrections officers, that's the word, their hands are very much tied when they want to do, when a child goes on probation, if that probation ends and part of their requirement is to do drug rehab or to do restitution or community service, if they haven't done that by the end of their probation, they're still dismissed from probation. So there's some kids, not all, but some kids see no consequence, even in parental homes. Some of our parental homes, their hands are tied because they're worried. They're worried. They don't want to lose their kids. Instead of it being a united force, it's a divided force. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Senator Erickson, very quickly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a comment as I've been listening to the testimony and how touching it is. And I want to say thank you, but Sister Theresa touched on something that reminded me and that I think sometimes we miss when she said that the trauma that stirs the soul. And I believe in what James 1:27 says, that pure and undefiled religion before God our Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their time of need. And so I don't see this as we sit here and appropriate funds and have a hearing. It is incumbent upon each of us as Kansans and members of our society to get involved and not go, well, that's an agency problem, or that's a legislative problem, or that's a foster parent problem. It is all incumbent upon all of us to be involved and aware and help these children and families and support them in any way that we can outside of a formal process. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Erickson, and thank you for all the testimonies this morning from the private citizens. I will say, as was mentioned from Emporia, Janelle Dupree's testimony, we heard from that in the judiciary, something very similar, Representative Howerton, in our Judiciary Committee about where do you place these children who are very violent. Foster parents are concerned for their own lives, their safety, and the safety of other adoptees and or foster children. I think we'll hear more about that in later testimony. Committee, we're moving on to the next section of our committee meeting today. Leading for Results study on placement instability, which goes along with our most recent discussion. This is Dr. Leanne Heaton, who is joining us through WebEx. And Dr. Heaton, would you introduce yourself and tell us about your title?
Yes. Can you hear me, Chair Gossage?
Yes, we can. Very well.
Wonderful. Good morning. Good morning to all the members of the committee. My name is Dr. Leanne Heaton, and I am here today on behalf of the Capacity Building Center for States. And I am a senior researcher at Chapin Hall, and I have been doing research for a number of years in child welfare, juvenile justice, and mental health. So I'm excited to share the findings that the Leading for Results work group worked very extensively on for a period of about a year and a half. And I can pull up my screen and start that as soon as you're ready.
And I think you're ready. Are you sharing the screen with her?
I will start now.
Okay, we're ready.
Okay, give me just one moment to get this lined up. I'll put it in the right mode here. Okay, I want to confirm that you can see the slides show.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Thank you so much, members of the Joint Committee on Child Welfare System Oversight. As I mentioned in my introduction, I am delighted and pleased to share the results of a team effort that took place and is still taking place across Kansas. Now, first it starts with the State Child Welfare Agency and all of the folks that you see listed here on the Kansas team, including your case management providers, service providers in your areas that work directly with foster families and those children and youth in foster care. It also includes the state DCF team. And I'm also going to show the center team. We have a series of consultants and experts that work together with states on behalf of the Children's Bureau to help improve services for children and families. And so that's what the background of this work that I'm going to share with you today. So I'd like to start this presentation by telling you the results right up front. What is the top level findings that this work group engaged in, and how we got to the theory of change, or the proposed theory of change that we would like to share with you today. I'm going to start with the end, but then I'm going to walk you through how we got to the results that we got. And you're going to see evidence and data and a lot of conversations and work that took place out in the various regions and areas of Kansas.
Dr.
I then will conclude. Yes.
This is Senator Gossage. I just want to remind the committee that in your packet you do have the slides that you were showing us if you want to make notes or anything like that. And also we have 30 minutes for this, but we would have about 15 minutes for the presentation and to allow time for questions. Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you. I hope that folks do have the information so that you can follow along. There are also some information at the end of the slide deck today that I may not be able to cover that illustrates some national trends that are consistent with what we discovered here in Kansas. And I also made a point of including some national initiatives that are very consistent with the theory of change that this work group worked on. So while we may not have time to cover all of those things, I did want you to have that information available as you think about potential solutions, collective community and agency solutions to this issue of placement instability in Kansas. So here, I'm showing you basically the bottom line, the top level findings. And I'm just going to walk you through this for just a second. So when we started this, we were interested in understanding why Kansas was experiencing such high placement instability. So as a researcher and as a former practitioner myself, what we want to see when children and youth have to be separated from their families because of significant issues related to abuse and neglect, we want them to be stable in their placement. And we want them to be stable in foster homes and in temporary placement so that they can achieve permanency. And we want them to achieve permanency quickly. Within 6 months is ideal, but definitely within 12 months. And when we say achieve permanency, we're really talking about reunifying with the family that they were separated from, or being adopted by families that love and care for them. And in some states, guardianship may be an option for relatives that they know. So that's what we mean. So what we don't want is children and youth to move around, like some of the testimony that you heard earlier. We definitely don't want them moving around. So this was something that we wanted to examine. And what we discovered that a good portion of what was contributing to placement instability, and I'll define that for you in just a moment, was actually less of a foster care problem than we thought. The main group, and I'll show you data that supports this in just a moment, that is driving placement instability in Kansas for older youth, teenagers, ages 13 to 18, with higher levels of disability and needs. And I'll show you some data in just a moment. So what we discovered through this, 3 root causes. Number one, this problem can actually be solved by stronger prevention in the community. Communities being involved together, partnering with systems. Number two, what we also uncovered through this effort is that the front door in Kansas into the foster care system is too wide. And I'm going to show you some data that will support that in just a moment. The third is that when you do have teenagers with intensive needs coming into foster care, you just simply need more placement for these kinds of youth. And that's a really hard population to find family-based placement, which we know are the best kinds of placements for children and youth to thrive. Okay, so the next slide I'm going to show you, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want you to take some time, if you're interested, to read a little bit about it. What we have here at the top are those 3 root causes. Part of the systematic inquiry that we undertook to get to this involves lots of discussions about contributing factors. And you can see those here. We have those organized by policy and practice, community and organizational resources, external factors, and so forth. And you can see that they're under each of the 3 root causes. And I'll walk you through this process in just a moment. Just one thing to note, because I heard it mentioned earlier, right before I started this presentation, is a lot of the members out in the areas, and even when they would come back to the state work group, would mention Senate Bill 367 as something that they thought might be contributing to this issue. So finally, this is the pathway of change that this work group developed systematically through the center's model, and I'll show you that in just a second. So if we know the population that's mostly driving placement instability, it's not all, but it is a good majority, are teenagers with intensive behavioral health needs, then we have to acknowledge that this is a cross-system and community, problem, but guess what? Systems and community, when they come together, can solve this problem. And you're going to see examples at the end of the slide deck where this is actually happening in other states. So the theory of change starts with simply thinking about how you can, as a collective group of caring individuals, can come together to align policies across systems, practices, fiscal, and community resources. If you align those strategically, and the systems that need to be involved in this are here: child welfare, behavioral health, juvenile justice, courts, service providers, Medicaid, you can create the kind of community prevention system that you need for this particular issue. And that way, youth with intensive behavioral health needs have the right community-based resources to meet their needs. Fewer youth will enter foster care and be stable in their communities. When they do have to enter foster care for significant safety concerns related to severe abuse and neglect, you will have the resources that you need. Particularly, you can look at relatives first, and then ultimately this right sizes your foster care system, right? So that you have the right resources and that the homes that you have can meet the needs of the children and youth in Kansas. So that's the bottom line. That's what we came up with. And this was a lot of work. And what I want to show you next is how we got to that. So I mentioned earlier that I am representing the Capacity Building Center for States in this particular work. And this is the technical assistance arm of the Children's Bureau. And so one of the things that we do is we follow a prescribed model. And the reason we do that is because it is based on research about works and systems, change and implementation model. So one of the first steps is you bring a team together because you have a problem. And that's what the Leading for Results group did. And then we engage in a very systematic process of problem exploration. And we develop a theory of change, which I just showed you. And we're going to walk through a little bit of this in just a moment. Foundational to this is data. Data drives the beginning part of this and problem exploration. What we are excited to do today, because the group has done a lot of problem exploration and theory of change, and it does take a bit of time if you do something systematically to a model that's based in evidence. Where we are today is this bottom right-hand corner, where we're in a point where we need an intervention to solve a lot of the placement instability in Kansas. And we are excited that this committee is interested in this work because it's not just the Child Welfare Agency that can solve this. It really needs to be the community and the systems that these youth interact with to come together to create a solution. And it's wonderful to have a legislative body interested in this because there probably does need to be some sort of legislative solution to this. So, next thing I want to tell you about is the data plan. So when we start this work, we always want to start with data. And we usually want to start with quantitative data or administrative data because that gives you a view of your entire population of foster children and youth in Kansas. And all states are required to track very systematically the children and youth that they bring into the state's custody and place in foster care. They're federal requirements. So that's what we did. And we always want to start this with questions like, well, what exactly are we trying to ask of the data? So the first thing that we want to ask is who is most impacted. So in this case, we were looking at placement instability. And let me just spend a few seconds defining what we mean by placement instability. I mentioned that we don't want children and youth to bounce around in foster care. In fact, we want the first placement to be the right and best placement. You heard testimony from foster parent here this morning. I heard it. And one of the things she said is, we don't want, our children to move. We develop relationships with them. That is exactly right. We want children and youth to be stable, and sometimes they have to go to an emergency placement first, but then we want to get them immediately to a right, stable placement for a variety of reasons. Number one, you can reunify quicker, get services to the family that they were separated from if a child or youth is stable in their placement. Number two, they can get to permanency in other areas quicker also. and that includes adoption or guardianship in some states. So we always want children and youth to be stable. So what we don't want is 3 or more moves in a year. So that's how we defined it. That's consistent with federal guidance, and it's also something that Kansas was already tracking. We also want to look at placement patterns. This is very important as a child welfare researcher to understand when children and youth come in, where are they going? And the reasons why they're coming in to foster care. So that's what we did. So the data we reviewed, I always start as a consultant and a researcher when I go into a state, and I work across a number of states right now implementing Family First provisions. And what I always do is look and see what data the Child Welfare Agency is already making publicly available to the public. What data are they putting out there for their legislative bodies, for just the public to know? And what I discovered is there was a lot of data Kansas is already posting publicly for folks to look at. And these are all the kinds of things you are already posting in the Child Welfare Agency. But what I find most often happens is data is not organized in a way that it can tell a story. So all the data was there, and part of our job as a capacity building center is to help states think about how to use their data differently and build capacity so that they can do this once the consultants leave. And so the data team in the child welfare side in Kansas has a lot of capacity, and it was just a matter of putting together something to organize it to tell the story. And so when we tell a story with data, we always want to do 2 things. We want to establish trends, and that's what we did. We looked at 5 years of data, and we even pulled in some more recent data for these presentations. And we have about half a year of state fiscal year 2023 data. And we always want to look at trends. Why? Because we don't want to base policy or serious decisions on anomalies or outliers. So we want to make sure that what we're seeing in the data is a pattern that needs to be addressed. Second, we always want to organize it in a way that we can figure out who and what, right? This is a very consistent approach with public health research. If you look in public health, you're always going to find like information about who, and that is gender, race, age, and for this population, disabilities, and I'll talk about what that means in just a moment, are common. So these are common characteristics that we need to understand about a child welfare population. So the thing that I want to draw your attention to is in the bottom right-hand corner, the who here. Now, we did look at gender, and there was a slight more males that were experiencing placement instability over time, but not that big of a difference. I always like to call out right now and always in my work throughout the years, the overrepresentation of certain racial and ethnic groups in child welfare data. We know that nationally, that's usually a result of poor policies or not the right resources in place. And so you have certain groups overrepresented because of that, and we don't want that. That's true in Kansas data, and it's true in a lot of states. And then I always like to call out anytime we see American Indian and Alaska Native children, because they're equal standards that need to be considered. So you see that at the top. But the real story here for Kansas is at the bottom corner there. You have almost 2/3 this age group, 13 to 18. This year, we've seen a presence of, and a trend with disabilities present in the instability population. But this year, right now, with half-year data, it's particularly high at 71%. And then we have about a quarter pretty consistently with histories of running away. So all this is starting to tell the story. And we're going to continue with that story for just a moment here. And the next thing that I want to show you is just this trend line to put a finer point on it. I find visualizing data can really help make the point. You can see that this age group, and this again is the placement instability group in Kansas, 3 or more moves in 12 months. You can see that if this trend is over half of that group, and it's been going steadily up, and it's up much more right now this particular state fiscal year. And we'll see if that trend holds. The next slide I want to show you is what I was mentioning earlier, presence of disabilities. Now, this term is a broad term. This term is based on guidance from the federal government, and the federal government defines what this means and it requires states to capture this information and report it to the federal government on an annual and biannual basis. And I have the link down here that I've added so that you can review for yourself what the guidance is. But this disabilities term means behavioral health related issues, which include mental health. It might include developmental disabilities. It can include physical disabilities. But in Kansas, this is what this term means. And a lot of the work group members has resonated with them, and they kept saying to us, yes, we're seeing more behavioral health related issues. So this measure and the trend that we're seeing makes sense. And that was something they shared out in the areas. Okay, the next thing I want to draw your attention to is the reason children and youth were coming into Kansas. So we got real interested in this.
Dr. Heaton, can you hear me? This is Senator Gossage. I'm looked through your presentations, excellent information, but we're short on time today. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to wrap up for us, if you could.
Absolutely. So what I want to show you next then, and you have lots of information in the slide deck, is that you have this primary removal reason that's not abuse and neglect related. Okay, these are families in need of assistance. That's what this means. So you have folks that need help, but they can be helped in their community. And when we remove, we know that can be particularly traumatic for children and youth. So this is a summary of what we've learned. I want to show you that. The next thing I just want to point out as our time comes to a close is when we look at these reasons, and again, these reasons are not abuse and neglect, we see that a couple of the primary reasons for placement instability are being driven by removals related to child behavior and caregiver inability to cope. I argue these are indications of service needs. These are not abuse and neglect. Folks just need help. They need resources to solve this. And that's what you can do as a community. The next couple of slides show you some trends related to what's been going on in the last few years about these two particular non-abuse neglect reasons. So I want to highlight those. And then just to show you the placement instability group, non-abuse and neglect removals, about half. Compared to those that are more stable in placement, we don't see the same level of child behavior problems. Again, this suggests service needs. Two more points, and then I'll turn it over because I know our time is tight. When we were talking about the front door in Kansas being too wide, this slide shows that 40% of the removals that are happening in Kansas are being initiated not by the child welfare agencies. This is a concern for several reasons. It doesn't mean that some of them don't need to happen, but this is unusually high in my experience. Why is this a problem? Because when the child welfare agency initiates a removal, they usually do prep, right? They usually figure out, well, what kind of homes might be available. They usually understand their resources. So when you have folks that are not in that system initiating a lot of these removals, the system is not prepared. It's not prepared from a readiness or a capacity to handle the volume that's coming in. And so that's contributing to your placement instability problem. And finally, this is a complex problem. It requires a lot more upstream effort. It's a wonderful opportunity to leverage prevention and your prevention dollars in Family First. The last thing that I want to let you know is that the systems, having done research in all three of these systems for a number of years, these systems, any change in one, policy or fiscal, is going to impact the other. They are intricately linked. We see it in the research. I see it every day in the work that I do at the state level, implementing Family First. The other thing I want to add to this is the Family First interventions that work with this population that Kansas has in the plan, multisystemic therapy, functional family therapy. These are evidence-based practices that work for the exact population that is driving instability in Kansas. And juvenile justice and child welfare in many states share these resources and share the funding because they know that one system impacts the other. And so the last thing I just want to put up on the slide deck, and then I'll stop, is that there actual examples of legislation that other states have taken up to deal with this very issue. Because what we don't want is lots of children and youth coming into foster care for unrelated to abuse and neglect. That's not what the foster care system is designed for. It is a temporary respite for severe abuse and neglect. You have a lot of good volunteers that work as foster parents, and we want to keep them. It is not a therapeutic mental health system. And so Washington recognized this and actually changed their legislation so that you could not remove a child from their parents, from their home, simply because they had needs. They recognized, you know what, we can actually do this in the community, and that's really where it needs to start, so that children can stay with their homes, and then your foster homes are actually prepared when you do need them. So I'm going to stop.
Thank you,
at
Dr.
this point.
We appreciate that. Committee, we have time for basically one or two questions, and I urge you to reach out to Dr. Heaton, and we have Representative Humphreys on the line.
Yeah, thank you. I'll make it super quick. Thank you, Dr. Heaton. I really appreciate the info. I had heard it in the Judiciary Committee, and we appreciate you caring about Kansas. Just a quick question. Can you remind us why you did this study, who had you do it, kind of where this came from?
That's a great question. So at the end of the Child and Family Services Review, round 3, which is the federal government oversight of state child welfare agencies, there's particular outcomes. There were particular measures that they had to be in compliance with. Placement instability is one of those metrics. And Kansas was not in compliance. In fact, if you go read the summary of the CFSR national report, Kansas actually had the highest placement instability rate in the country at the end of round 3. So the Children's Bureau said, hey, let's figure out what's going on. We're going to get the Capacity Building Center in there to help researchers like myself, and we're going to work together as a team to figure this out. So that's how all this came about.
Okay, thank you. Just to confirm, so it wasn't coming from the state, it was more coming from your organization deciding that we needed this information?
Well, I would say that the state probably knew that it was something they wanted to address also. But it also was in partnership with the federal government, because these are metrics that all states are required to track as part of understanding their service delivery. But I would say it was a joint effort, because the reality is states don't want children and youth bouncing around either. They want them to be stable.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Committee, it's 10:30. We're going to move to our next section, which would be for the Department for Children and Families update. And Natalie, if you would, please, if you could make sure that this contact information for Dr. Heaton is sent out, because I just see we had another question that we weren't able to get to. Now, Dr. Howard is up to Laura Howard is up to the microphone, and she's the Secretary for Children and Families. Welcome back.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate having the opportunity to be here today. And I appreciate you taking the time to hear the presentation from Dr. Heaton. I'm going to just clarify, we had created a Leading for Results Placement Stability Work Group a couple of years ago, obviously partly driven by, the federal data, but also all the things that we've been talking about in Kansas about placement stability. And then as a result of that work group, during the context of that work group, we felt like it might be helpful to get some technical assistance. So we reached out to the Children's Bureau, and they brought Dr. Heaton in, and it was a great value to the work group, comprised of DCF and our partners. So again, you'll actually hear some themes in my testimony that I think complement what Dr. Heaton said, and that my testimony was actually prepared before I knew she was going to be presenting. So it's a bit of a nice confluence, because much of what you heard her talk about are things I think you have heard us talk about over the last couple of years in terms of the areas where we place a lot of focus. I know the time is short today, so I will skim over a few slides at the very beginning about some of the data all the way over on slide 4, we like to show you the trends of the number of children in foster care. You can see as of a month ago, down to about 6,171, continuing to see a modest downward trend, again, down just under 20% since 2019 in terms of the numbers. You'll see a similar slide on page 5 for youth entering care. I might caveat, if you look at the slide, that last drop down where it shows the 1554 on slide 5, that's just for half a year. So again, don't look at that as an abrupt trend this fiscal year. But again, continuing to see those numbers go down. On page 6. And I mean, this is an area that we had wanted to talk with this committee more about and provide some data that we haven't talked about as much. And Dr. Heaton just talked about this as well. In terms of the reasons that children enter foster care, and you can see the data here. In Kansas, families can enter foster care for reasons of abuse or neglect. You see that ranging on these charts over the years from as low as 63% to as high as about 74%. But the other reason are those families in need of assessment, that child behavior, the family service needs. And you see a pretty large cohort in Kansas and some increases in those numbers, although I think that some of those increases may have to do with the fact of the reduction in our overall population and some of the prevention work that we've done. Also on page 7 of the slides, just to maybe sit for just a minute on something that Dr. Heaton was talking about towards the end of her presentation, in terms of the percentage of youth who enter foster care at the request of DCF and the percentage who enter at the request of the DA or the court. And the reason why I just wanted to make the point that I wasn't sure was clear. Oh, sorry, Senator.
No, you're fine, Secretary Howard. I'm just trying to see, I know we have people that are on WebEx that are watching, and it would be easier for them to be able to see the data. Can we put the slides up?
I'm sorry, Senator, I didn't realize they weren't up.
No, that's okay. We have them here for the committee. Just thought those in the room and also those on WebEx would like to see them. There we are.
Slide 7.
Nope. I don't think that's it. Yeah, that's St. Francis Ministries.
Yeah, it looks like this.
Yeah. Do I? Thank you for your indulgence. We just thought it would be more important, and I think we're trying to get that over to our technical team. Secretary Howard, perhaps we could just jump ahead and come back to the chart, the graphs. I think the graphs are difficult to understand.
Sure.
If you can't see them,
Sure.
maybe we can move to prevention.
Yeah, that'd be great. I just wanted to make one point about the context of when the child doesn't come into care at the request of DCF. And one of the impacts of that is that we don't get that opportunity at the front end. I mean, this feeds into prevention, right? So when you think about families first, when you think about the ability to divert from the foster care system and provide those services, there's a cohort of youth. You're on the right page. That's great. Yeah. There's just that cohort of youth that is more difficult then to have that opportunity before they've come into foster care. So I think that's why that's an important facet for us to think about, to work with our judicial partners on in terms of when we don't get that occasion and opportunity. So I will, though, move over to prevention. I'll move over to page 10, actually. And again, just based on the last dialogue you had, this is why we talk so much about prevention. I wanted to bring up a couple of new items with regard to some work that's going on here in Kansas. We've been kind of tracking closely some work that's been happening in the state of Iowa over the last 2 or 3 years. It's actually culminated in some legislative changes. Their judges did a judicial pilot program where they went through asking a series of 4 questions before removing a child from the home. You can see the questions on page 10 on the right side. What can we do to remove the danger instead of the child? Can someone the child or family knows move into the home to remove the danger? Can the caregiver and the child go live with a relative or family friend? Could the child move temporarily? And very, very interesting in Iowa, it was just a pilot project. It wasn't statewide, but it resulted in a 50% reduction of children coming into care. So we had the chance to have some Iowa judges present at a legal and social connection series that we sponsor in the state about how Iowa judges are keeping families safe and together. And then we're continuing some of those questions across our regions. But on page 11, I just wanted to call out a little bit about that journey in Iowa. So again, as I said, the pilot project resulted in a 50% reduction of children coming into care. And then Iowa has then, as a result of that pilot, they actually, kind of similar to the statutory change you saw in the state of Washington, they've recently changed their statute in a couple of different ways to require a judge to seek the least restrictive care for a child with a preference for that placement. The criticality of that first placement being with child's family. And then the other legislative change was requiring the court to find by substantial evidence that the need for removal outweighs the potential harm that removal would cause the child. We know that there's trauma that happens when a child comes into foster care. So again, they've seen significant impact in terms of reducing youth coming into care and an increase in the initial placement with family and relatives. So again, I put on the next page, on page 12, just some additional work we're doing around that Iowa project in terms of those 4 questions. We're using those ourselves in our team decision-making process, and we're having those kinds of conversations with our court partners across the state. Another area of prevention I wanted to highlight on page 13, which I think really gets to the kind of the conversation about community engagement and involvement early with families. We contracted in July of 2021 with the Kansas Children's Service League to expand and support new family resource centers in Kansas from getting certification from the National Family Support Network. Family resource centers, we haven't had very many of these in Kansas. They're very community-based hubs. They could be school-based or other community organization that's really there to support families with children of all ages to be strong, healthy, and successful. You can see some national outcomes on the right side of the page. Reductions in the rate of child abuse investigations, reductions in the rate of substantiated cases, entry into foster care, increases in children's educational success, increases in family degree of self-sufficiency. So we've had the opportunity to put out an RFP to develop some additional family resource centers in Kansas. We just recently announced those, and you can see those on page 14. The awards that we've made across the state. These aren't expensive programs. I mean, there's not a lot of cost associated with this. I think one of the important pieces is that it's really with trusted partners and communities. So again, you can see a combination of childcare, school districts, community-based organizations that we recently awarded these grants to. We're really excited about the possibility. This really moves prevention even more upstream and has a trusted community resource that families having struggles and issues can access. Another area I also wanted to highlight with regard to prevention is some work that we're doing. This is on slide 15 with our partners at Medicaid. We're working this year to add services for children's behavioral interventionists as a Medicaid covered service for an in-home support to parents and caregivers to manage high and emotional crisis needs. You actually heard a report from Foster Adopt Connect in your last fall about the impact and the value and the efficacy of behavior interventionists. So if we're successful in this, we would actually be the first state to actually have this service in our Medicaid state plan. Really effective service. Again, talking about those high needs youth, helping to keep children safely in their home, and if they're in care, helping to keep those placements stable. Also, just as an FYI, our family preservation grants will be going out for rebid this year as well. On page 16 and the pages that follow, the Family First Prevention Act, I'm not going to go through all the details about this. I think you all are well familiar with it by this point. But again, I always want to thank the legislature for its strong support of Kansas kind of going headfirst into this. The point I really did want to make on page 17 is that we've just announced the new round of grants for Family First. And in this round, we were able to increase funding to $28 million based on the enhanced funding that you and the governor recommended and supported last year. And one of the things that I'm probably most excited about it is that we've been able to expand multisystemic therapy, which you also just heard about this morning, statewide through this expansion. We did not have as many evidence-based family preservation services to really target that older youth behavioral needs population. And so, again, we're very excited about that, as well as the fact that we have some new substance use disorder services as well. And I won't go through all these, but for your information, on page 18 and on page 19, you'll see the organizations that have received those awards in the different categories of parent skill building, kinship navigation, substance use, and mental health, and then a couple of other primary prevention activities that you're already aware of. So again, expansion there, I think, will only continue to have a positive impact in terms of reducing the need for youth to enter the foster care system. On page 20 and 21, you've seen these charts before, but they're updated to kind of show you we've had since from October 2019 to December 2022, we had more than 3,600 referrals for Family First, almost half of those for mental health services. And you can see, pretty widely spread across the state. And again, continue to have good outcomes with 88% of target children and youth who've reached 12 months from the time of service referral remaining together at home. And we have some programs where no youth have entered into care. So again, very, very positive outcomes. So again, those were kind of the things I wanted to highlight on prevention. A couple things in foster care itself I also wanted to mention today. On page 23, really just a reminder for this group that This is the year that we will be issuing an RFP for our case management providers. You can see the timeline there. I think we provided that to you before. But we expect to issue the RFP by the end of May. With new contracts awarded by the end of the calendar year to be effective July 1st of 2024. I gave you a list on page 24 of a number of listening sessions that we held in the month of January. With community partners, with congregate care providers, with the legal community, tribal MCOs, and then just community partners, and also with the community mental health centers. Also, of course, in looking at these, we're also looking at recommendations from this committee, insights from work from the child advocate during the time of the tenure of that office, as well as some other community meetings we held last year in response to some legislation from Senator Faust-Goudeau and some good input from some other pieces across the state. So again, we're in that process. We expect the RFP to be issued around the end of May through the Department of Administration's procurement process. On page 25, I wanted to highlight just the area of the reduction in need for foster care. You saw those aggregate numbers, but I think sometimes it's good to talk about the successes in certain areas. We kind of mention here 4 different counties, Geary, Johnson, Saline, and Wyandotte. And you can see just some of the impact of their work during kind of a 6-month time period. 16% reduction in the need for foster care in Geary County, similar in Johnson County. And then Saline County has been really a model in terms of reducing the need for foster care over the past 3 years by 55%. Wyandotte as well, 40% reduction in the past 3 years. And again, a lot of facets. We talked about family first, the importance of community partnerships, team decision making, how active and engaged the relationship is between DCF and the court system, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think one piece, those areas who perhaps have a different process to work on the issue of truancy, so we don't have truants coming into care in certain jurisdictions. And again, much of this also is due to programs you have funded and been very generous with resources. I wanted to talk about placement stability as well in a couple different facets. On page 26, the whole issue of youth absent from placement. I think most of you know we have kind of special response teams with DCF staff and staff also embedded within our case management partners. And I just really wanted to highlight kind of the Sedgwick County team and St. Francis. This had been an area where we had, on a typical basis, often had 25 youth or more on the run in Sedgwick County. They've been working really, really hard, and that number's now been down to around 15 youth in any given month. So they've been putting a lot of effort and energy there, and I just wanted to call that piece out. So wanted to talk about that youth absent from placement. Page 27, therapeutic foster homes. Important facet for placement stability, I think also important to the conversation you've been having here over the last hour about youth with high acuity needs. We created this new level of care. I think since going live, we've approved 12 therapeutic foster homes. I think there's still additional work to be done, and I know there's been dialogue during this legislative session about some additional resource around what are the supports that those families really need. What does respite look like for those? Is there enhanced training? Because, it's a big choice to make, to decide to want to become a therapeutic foster home, and those families that are taking on youth with some of those highest needs and really wanting to make sure that they're well supported. So again, it's in our continuum, and it wasn't, and we're really pleased to have 12 homes, but I'm not satisfied with that, and I do think there's some more supports and things we need to wrap around that to really make that more viable. I think we would really like to have probably around 40 homes across the state. So again, work in progress. Other facets around preventing failure to place. I think we talked with you before about some things we've done in terms of adding a full-time recruiter to each child placing agency to enhance foster parent recruitment efforts, especially around those issues of high needs youth or specialized care for IDD, things like that. We also created the option to join a failure to place network. We began covering the costs of standby services for a space in a foster home or in a residential facility, and our partners had the chance to join that. That's been successful. On page 29, I give you some data on that. Our failure to place instances, we're really talking kids in offices here. Our failure to place instances have reduced about 50% since October of 2022. We're not at zero. I would like to be at zero, but since October of 2022, we've had 82 youth that have been able to take advantage of those standby beds that we created, where we had foster homes or group placements that held beds to take those youth who might otherwise have a failure to place. We have 24 family foster home placement beds and 12 facility placement beds. So that's great. So that's 82 youth who didn't spend the night in an office. We had 42 failure to place instances since October across 28 youth. That's about half for the period of October 21 to March of 2022. So it's about half of a year ago. This March, we had 6 instances across 5 youth. So again, making progress. I think we still have a little ways to go to get to that piece. Maybe one of the last things on placement moves on slide 30, these are a couple charts again. That first chart, the CFSR rate of moves, where you can see that was at 9.9 in state fiscal year 19 to 20, really dropped, kind of went back up again. This is the rate of moves in the first 1,000 days of entry into care. And I would say, I also just got some January data that shows it down at 7.0. So we have some specific partners that are doing very well. TFI, 5.5. Again, it ranges across the different regions, but the one thing I was looking at the data across our various regions and are seeing a decline, even amongst where it's the highest, seeing some decline in each of those areas. But I also wanted to maybe draw your attention to the slide on the right side of the page. What this slide talks about, this is for the entire population of youth in foster care. How many moves did they have in the prior 12 months? And I think what this slide shows is, whether it's 79%, 81%, or 77%, that 3/4 to 80% of youth in our care have had one or fewer moves in the past 12 months. So most youth in the foster care system are in stable placements. So we really start talking about that cohort, the very cohort we've been talking about all morning, where we've got the high needs, we have the run behavior, we have some things where that child's trying to tell us something, and we have areas where we have, I think, other service needs that are important that we fill those gaps. So again, I think it's important to think about that, because there's an awful lot about that cohort of that 20 to 25% of youth, a lot of older youth, where that's where a lot of our energy and focus is. So again, I'm almost finished. I know the time is done. I know you want to have a chance to ask questions. We will have the next Children and Family Services Review here in Kansas this month. I know that was mentioned earlier. This is round 4. Those happen about every 5 years. So we will have our federal partners here in the state for the week of April 17th to 21st. We actually had the chance to do training for the statewide review team that supports that effort, and our federal partners were really impressed because we actually had 4 judges who have volunteered to be case reviewers. So in DCF, we have some court representation, we have DCF, we have our providers, and we have some stakeholders, and our federal partners were very impressed. They said in many states it's just the state agency staff. So again, that'll be good to have that review and see what comes from that. I know we don't have time today to talk about the SOUL program, but I might make a pitch maybe in the interim if we could spend a little bit more time on that program. This is a youth-driven initiative that we decided to jump on with the Annie Casey Foundation that would create a new permanency option for older youth. And I would love for you to hear that the whole process we're going through in Kansas with Annie Casey, the work groups that are in place across systems, they're really being led by our youth leaders. And I'd really like you to hear from them, because what's going to be important with this is that this summer and fall, consultation is going to begin with legal experts, judges, and others about what statutory changes would need to take place to actually have this be a viable permanency option again. So I would just love you to hear from the youth leaders about this themselves. They can be far more compelling than I could ever be about it, Senator. So I think that's really all I had to say. We have an update on we did issue the bids on the Child Welfare Information System on March 20th. The primary RFP will close May 17th related to the Child Welfare Information System. I think I'll stop with that, Senator, so you can ask questions.
Thank you. And Secretary Howard, I know that was a lot of information to get to in a very short period of time, but we are going to take time for about 3 questions. And then, of course, we know how to get a hold of you for additional questions that we have. And I think we have a question online, do we not? Thought you were telling me that. Okay, we have 2 here on committee, so that will be 4. Representative Humphreys.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Secretary. And I'm glad you mentioned the RFP for the CWIS technology information system right there at the end. And I want to look at it over the break. It seems complicated. So could you just give us a very quick rundown of what that RFP is about, and when would you expect that system to be operational? And then also, sir, I'll just go ahead and ask my last question about the amount that you're requesting from the state for that. So that's kind of 3 questions, but if you don't mind answering those, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Representative. I hope I can get to all 3 of those. I think, as you know, this system will replace what are currently 5 legacy systems. And one of the valuable things that this will bring as well is direct connection with our case management providers. So information is consolidated and coordinated in the same place. So we are excited about that. I'm going to be very careful what I say since I have an open RFP. But in terms of the conversation about when we would expect anything to be active, the RFP, which is public and that you can read, asks the people who are bidding to present to us their proposals for how a comprehensive system would come online. For example, could certain pieces, we kind of ask folks to kind of think in kind of an agile way, if you think about kind of IT language. For example, could certain pieces happen before other pieces, or would the thought be from an entity to just have this big bang at the end, which might be 3 years from now. So it's hard to answer your question today, because until we have those bids and we see what people bring forth, But we basically called out in several different modules that we've asked that they have to be part of the comprehensive system. And I don't know today what vendors will say in terms of what the timeline by which they might be able to bring different parts to the table if they can do that. In terms of funding, we have existing funding in our budget from prior planning funding that this legislature has provided. We have around $15 to $17 million in our budget right now. So we are not currently asking for any additional funding from this legislative session, but you will likely see a request either for a supplemental or for funding in the next fiscal year budget based on the timing of the bids and those things.
And if I could just do a quick follow-up question. So I think the amount that was presented to the Joint Committee on Information Technology was around $104 million. And just so we kind of get that out. And I'd be interested in, where that's going to go, but that's probably for a different time. And I just need to point out, we've been talking about this for years. And if you're saying some of these people who answer the RFP might be 3 or 4 years, 2027, like right now, we're not going to be able to get the benefit. Is there anything we can do now to get these things going? And because we've heard today that part of the problem is overloaded caseworkers. And, it seems like there are things we can do to speed up the system, licensing and different things. So I just want to encourage you, all of us, to not be satisfied with, 2027.
I guess I'm wondering how those were chosen. Were those selected by any data of where there's the most need, or how were those decisions made?
Yeah, thank you, Representative. It was a competitive bid process, and so there were proposals that were sent in to us. There were a handful we didn't have resources to fund, and we just, like any competitive process, tried to look at the proposals that were submitted, and again, tried to get some geographic spread across the state. I certainly hope we'll be able to add to that mix as well. So.
Okay, thank you. And Madam Chair, I'd just like to point one other thing out while we were discussing the placement instability, the therapeutic foster homes. I would, the House budget has that budgeted for. It's my understanding that the Senate doesn't. So I just wanted to advocate that with our Senate partners, that if you could speak to your chair on the importance of that. We've just seen great presentations on it today, and I think that is funding that we would certainly like to see move forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Secretary, you talked about what DCF is doing based on the Iowa pilot in your slides, but the initiatives that Dr. Heaton reported mentioned Illinois, Virginia, and Ohio, and the need for the governor leadership. Can you share with us what the governor is doing to bring the executive agencies together around the issues of Senate Bill 367?
Yeah, probably not so much around Senate Bill 367 per se, but we're working across the administration to address some of these cross-systems issues. So, a few things I would mention. One, that I think is really critical in the child welfare system is the intersection with our managed care organizations and Medicaid and the role that they play. And I know one of the initiatives that Dr. Heaton called out in Ohio had to do with that initiative. So we're working closely with Health and Environment, with our MCOs, about kind of the role they can play around placement stability, particularly for those high needs youth, and how they wrap care coordination and things like that around the child. And then some of the other work, and of course I wear two hats with DCF and KDADS, right? So we're also working, across the administration, across those agencies, and with our community mental health center partners. So much of what we've talked about today is behavioral health. So we put we've put some new standards into their contract over the last year with regard to how quickly foster youth can access services. And it goes beyond that, but you kind of get the idea. And then have had a number of dialogues and conversations with them related to the impact of the new CCBHC models and what that's going to mean for foster youth. And I think the last thing I would say is just with Department of Corrections and Juvenile Justice. I mean, you all are having those conversations this session around House Bill 2021 and things like that. But we continue to have a number of dialogues around the issue of the evidence-based funding and some of the work that we might do if we were able to have access to some of those resources. So again, that's kind of, I think, in the legislative court right now. So.
Thank you. And our last question is from Senator Falscado.
Thank you, Madam Chair Gossage. Secretary Howard, kind of on the lines of what the doctor talked about of all the players being at the same table, and you mentioned a summit of some sorts that you had with judges and other entities. Was that a one-time deal, or do you plan to move forward with that on a regular basis? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I was actually talking about a regular effort that we have that relates to a legal partnership that actually our regional director in Kansas City has initiated. That's been very very important. I think too, though, I think some of you may know that there's also some dialogue going on right now about having a child welfare and judicial summit with legislative, the governor, our agency, and partners, similar to the mental health summit that happened last year. So we're very excited about that. I think I actually have a meeting next week to talk with the Chief Justice and Justice Standridge about that. So I think we're very excited about that. With all the dialogue we've had, we continue to have around the intersection with courts and just some of the things I've shared today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. A couple of quick things. One is we heard in testimony when you were in here about the licensing of the care management team. And can you address that, the case managers?
I can, Senator. And folks are right. I mean, a few years ago, social work licensure would have been required. With workforce challenges, that's changed over time. What's required right now is a 4-year degree in human services. And for example, at DCF, within our own protection staff, that's the requirement. The preferred requirement that you see in state is to have a licensure as a social worker or as a master's marriage and family therapist or something like that. And we actually pay a higher salary if they're licensed. But the actual requirement, to just answer your core question, right now is a 4-year degree in human services.
And then if you could get back to us, how many of the caseworkers have their social work degrees and how many fall into the 4-year degree human resources? I know you don't have that off the top of your head today.
I don't, and we'd probably have to ask our case management partners about their teams. So thank you.
Lastly, on slide 24, the foster care case management, it was the 8 RFPs listening sessions that you had in January. What was unfortunate is I wanted to attend. I wasn't able to do any of these because we were in session. So I would request that, at least some of those next time could be at a time like after hours or on a Friday or something where we would have an opportunity to listen in.
Thank you.
And that's it. Thank you so much, Secretary.
Thank you.
Was there something else?
We just had another question.
Okay. We've run over. If we have time, Madam Secretary, will you still be here? Yes. If the child advocate presentation is not quite as long, Representative Underhill, I'd be happy to include you. Thank you for your understanding. Committee, we are now going to move on to the presentation from the Kansas Division of Child Advocate to give us an update. And we have Carrie Leonard with us.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Is this on? Okay. Vice Chair and members of the committee, I will do my best to leave some extra time for some additional questions. I also just want to note that I know that there was a question of the secretary in regards to the presentation on for those online, and I did just send it just to speak from, so I apologize in advance for that if you have any trouble following along. So just wanted to provide a quick update. So hopefully most of you have either heard or had an opportunity to review the 2022 annual report from the Division of the Child Advocate. And so really my goal this morning is to just really give you a quick snapshot of what things have looked like now this first quarter of 2023. So the first thing to share is that we have been able to begin initiating our case management system. So as we were operating last year, we were doing it the old school way. And so we are now working within our case management system, and we have moved from really that training piece of it to implementation. And it's still a work in progress, but I do believe that it will, it will just help with our efficiency, our organization, and oh, okay. I wanted to pause if I needed to.
They're just making sure your slides are up, and they are now up.
The second thing that we really have continued to work on is our outreach. And so again, being a new division here in Kansas, we want to continue to reach the different communities across Kansas. And so we have shared some of our efforts in 2022, and then moving forward in 2023, we have now tried to do some outreach with every unified school district here in Kansas. Our next step was to reach out to all of our community mental health centers, our CMHCs, and then our next round will be to try to share our information with our community health departments as well. So that's just a continued and ongoing effort to make those connections in our communities. And our next update, and those of you who have been on the committee had an opportunity to review our preliminary report on our former foster parent survey. We had a number of folks who were willing to speak with us directly and really bring voice to some of their responses. And so we are finalizing those final calls and touch points, and hopefully bringing even more of a human voice to those responses. Our intention will be to have a final report with recommendations to this committee the next time you come together, assuming it's not within the next couple of weeks. So, also within that is we had initiated a conversation and dialogue around the best interest staffing process. And again, we have had the opportunity to meet with a lot of the different stakeholders. I would say the next kind of group of stakeholders that we do want to hear from are guardian ad litems. It's a little bit challenging to try to figure out how to reach the guardian ad litems across the state. Once we're able to do that and hopefully gather some information, again, our goal then will be to provide this committee and others with some of those, what we're hearing from the partners, the stakeholders, and participants as to what's working, what's not, and hopefully have some good recommendations moving forward. And then just collaboration. We want to continue to collaborate with all of the different stakeholders, and this committee is well versed on the complex systems that is our child welfare. And if we as a division can be a place to bring those voices together and collaborate for systems improvement, then that continues to be a goal. Just some kind of updates in regards to just some data. Just gave you a quick snapshot of the number of complaints that are coming in this first quarter in comparison to 2022. And then when we look at our referral source, that we hope to use some of this this information and tracking to think about who are we not reaching, who do we need to build relationships with to make sure that they do know that our division is available as a resource. And so one of the interesting, I think, statistics that comes out of that is that we had 17% referrals from the case manager themselves. So that tells us that case managers are feeling confident that if someone is bringing a concern to them, that they're providing our information to whoever that is as a referral source. If you look at the map of of Kansas. In our annual report, we try to provide just a good visual in regards to where the concerns are coming from and the cases that we have. This is just a map of what is looking for the first quarter of 2023. You'll see some changes in numbers. I think one of the things to note is in our Northeast area, we have a larger number than we had before. We had received a systemic concern, and so we have a number of cases that we're looking in that area. Complainant relationship, again, is just something that we're continuing to track and note of those individuals that are bringing the concerns to our office. So far, then, in 2023, in the last 3 months, we've received 48 formal complaints. Again, those come to us through our online complaint form. They can also come to us just by contacting us by phone through our toll-free number or through whatever way that they're able to reach us, although we do continue to encourage folks to fill out the online complaint form because that does provide us the most information in advance to start looking at the concerns. Of those 48, it involves around 77 children. We do have a few that have been determined to be out of scope, and I think I've shared with some examples of that before. Again, our goal, though, in those cases is to, if we can identify a resource, provide education, even in those situations, then our goal is to do that. Some of the things that I think has been an ongoing question is, what are those primary complaint reasons that are coming in the door? And so when we look at the primary complaints, one of our largest ones continues to be complaints or concerns regarding agency conduct. And so of those, really the biggest one that we hear is communication failures. So if whether it's the lack of communication that's being provided, a delayed response in communication, a mistrust in the communication, or whatever the breakdown is what we're continuing to hear. If we as a division working on those complaints can help bridge those gaps and improve communication, then that's one of our primary goals, is to help connect people, and hopefully then they can move forward at a different level. The second primary concern that we're hearing really is around child well-being and permanency. The largest of that is unreasonable delay in achieving permanency. And so there's so many factors that can play into why there is delay in permanency, whether it's lack of resources that are being provided to the family, placement instability. It also can really play into how things are working within our courts, and if there's been delays with court hearings or things are delayed there. So I think I've shared and tried to break down. We really have tried to break down the types of investigations into 3 main categories. And so I tried to provide you an example of the numbers that we're looking at. So currently, right now, we have 82 case-specific investigations. And I think what's important to think about when we're looking at these, what we consider open cases, is that how we track our cases. So oftentimes, as cases come in, we open it and we're working in the investigation. Along the way, as we're investigating, we're also trying to advocate for change, ask questions, promote best practices along the way. As it moves forward, we don't actually close a case within our office and keep track of that number until we issue some sort of final report. And you see in our annual report in the appendix some examples of how the annual report outlines some of our findings, and then our recommendations, and then agency responses. So we have quite a few that are working within the writing stage. And a question that I have received several times is just some of those kind of day-to-day examples of advocacy that our case analysts and our team are doing. And so I tried to provide just a quick few examples of those, of how, sometimes just making, like I said, a quick phone call can change the trajectory or help improve communication and hopefully resolve then that concern. And and then just as far as some policy and practice considerations, I appreciate the Secretary actually noted one of those that I had included in the annual report, which was the 4 questions out of Iowa. I had the opportunity to attend that presentation, and it was extremely powerful to hear from those judges. One, what led to their collaboration and how they came up with the 4 questions, and then 2, what their experience was with that pilot project and how they really saw the impact and change. And so I would encourage this joint committee to take some time to look at that and even reach out to the judges. I think that they would be open to hearing from the committee to ask how that project worked, how it came about, and the impact that it's had on their state. And then I just want to take a few moments to say thank you for moving forward. I think most importantly up front is that the Bill of Rights for both our youth and our foster parents. That is something that as a division we were hearing a lot of concerns around was the voice of both our youth and our foster parents. And so I appreciate the movement, the collaboration, and moving forward on those bills. And Madam Chair, that concludes my testimony, and I would be more than happy to stand for questions.
Perfect. And do we have questions for the child advocate? Yes, Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. One of the things that we heard earlier, and we continue to hear from foster parents as well as biological parents, is communication issues where it's the facts have just been misrepresented by caseworkers. So, the advocate spoke to that, but what recommendations does she have that we can avoid just some really egregious misrepresentation of documents that go to the judiciary?
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that question. It is a concern. And I think that one, looking at the reasons as to why there's that misrepresentation of communication. What we have learned in our reviews is that sometimes it is that information was documented incorrectly the first time, and it is literally a cut and paste issue. And I think oftentimes that it's a time element that, as we have high worker turnover, that they're taking information that they've read in the file, that they've seen in a court report prior, and they're just continuing to repeat that same information, and they don't have the time or the capacity to go back and verify it themselves. So I think that that's one piece, is really looking at what is contributing to our high worker turnover. The other piece is, and I think it's multifaceted and they're all interrelated. So the other piece is supervision. So when we talk about the supervision of our workers, again, we know it's not new, we have a worker shortage. So a lot of our supervisors are carrying their own caseloads or covering because of those shortages. And so they're not able to provide the necessary supervision to then their direct service case managers they're working with the families, getting the information. We also there are some bad actors, and we know that in anything and everything that we do. And in those situations, I do think it's necessary that, again, that plays into that supervision piece. It plays into the administration of our CMPs and DCF in holding each other accountable and getting the information out there. I think this can play into that ethics piece. I think we heard the question about the licensure issue. And so, one of the things that we often try to connect folks to is if they have a concern regarding ethics, whether it's an attorney or a social worker or a judge, that try to direct them and connect them to the bodies that are already in place to investigate that. I think an important point that was raised earlier today was that question about who then investigates those who are not licensed. And so I do think that's an important thing for us to consider looking at and balance that in regards to the worker shortage, but also holding people accountable for proper ethics.
Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've heard a lot about retaliation with foster parents and their fear of that. Is that something your office could track, maybe like an anonymous way to track that if they wanted to submit what happened to them anonymously, and then you can compile that report? Or is it something you've looked into? Is it something you're currently doing?
Thank you, Representative Howerton. Yes, so retaliation is something that we hear as a primary concern. It's also, I would say, very at the forefront of a lot of the conversations that we heard in the former foster parent survey that we're compiling. And so, one, I hope that through that process, we're able to highlight some of those areas and experiences, and hopefully provide some recommendations. But we also, folks are always welcome to voice their concern, whether it's anonymously or otherwise, to our office, and that's information that we would track and compile and provide. Yes.
Any other questions for Carrie? Yes, Representative Underhill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're relatively new, so how do people know about you, find out about your office, and know that you're a resource that's out there? How do the foster families and people know that you exist?
Thank you, Representative. So, a lot of different ways. The one, when the office was first created back in, I guess, the executive order was issued in October of 2021. There was some information out in the news. And so honestly, when I was appointed and started, I had a few folks track me down through that process and say, hey, we've been watching for this, and located me. And then moving forward, really our goal was to continue to get the word out. And so creating a website. And I think, one of the first presentations I shared is that we were having trouble with it showing up even when you did the Google search, but I think that problem solved. So if you search it on Google, it should come up fairly quickly. We have a social media presence. Probably could amp that up a little bit as we move forward. And then just outreach. And so over 2022 and then moving forward, we've tried to share information by meeting with just different entities. So we started, we've met with DCF staff, we've met with all of their CMPs, our CPAs. I had an opportunity to share with a foster parent support group. Oftentimes it's word of mouth. And then as I noted before, we're also trying to share information with a lot of our community providers, whether it's our educators, our mental health providers. But as a new entity, there's still folks out there that don't know. And so we continue to want to, provide whatever outreach and connections that we can.
Representative, would you like to ask your question now of the Secretary? Very good. And Senator Bob Gardner has the last question.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. The failure to place program that the Secretary spoke to, it's been continued and it's budgeted for this next year for $3.5 million. So who is advocating for the kids that are in failure to place? I've heard some concerns that these kids aren't receiving typical assessments, aren't having family visits, and that we're not really tracking how long they are in the placement. But so are they assigned a caseworker, and who is advocating for those that are categorized in that failure to place program?
So, Senator, I'm not sure that maybe I'm the best person to respond to that question. That might be something more appropriate for the Secretary, if she has that information.
Would you like to address that question to the Secretary? She's still in the room. Senator Baumgardner?
That would be fine. Whoever could answer it.
Thank you, Carrie. And Secretary Howard.
Thank you, Senator. Secretary Howard again. I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but for those youth who might be served in the failure to place network, where they're placed in one of those designated beds. I mean, they have a case manager just like any other child, and then the focus is then on getting them to a permanent placement. So again, they're either in a regular foster home or in a bed in a group home that we've identified, but they have a regular case manager just like any other child. So we know where they are. We track that. We can measure how long they're in those placements. We've had cases where those placements have turned into their permanent placement.
Well, if I might then, Chair, why are we budgeting an extra $3.5 million for the failure to place program if they're being placed in a foster home or a group home, which is already within the system? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator, I'm not sure I'm tracking the $3.5 million and where that comes from. The cost associated with the failure to place is the point that we have asked foster homes or group homes to hold a bed, like a bed hold, like you might have at like at a nursing home when someone goes to the hospital. So we're providing a lesser payment for that bed being held even when it's empty. So that's where the cost comes from. That cost is built into the foster care budget as a part of caseload.
Okay. And the figure is 3.6 million. That was in the budget packet that we as a legislature received that we voted on. 3.6 million SGF for a continuation of the failure to place program. That's where it came from.
Thank you, Senator. I didn't recall that number. I mean, that was built into the foster care caseload. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Secretary. And now we will move on, committee, to the Foster Care and Family Preservation Case Management Provider Update. And we will begin with Justin Horton of Cornerstones of Care.
Afternoon, everyone. Chair Gossage, members of the committee, my name is Justin Horton. I am the Chief Programs.
And I apologize to have to interrupt you. Just wanted to make sure everyone understood we have 3 minutes to make sure we allow for questions.
Oh, no.
Thank you.
Okay. I can't do an introduction in 3 minutes, Senator. Okay. A few facts about Cornerstones of Care. We've been around 153 years. We are not new to Kansas. We've been providing services in Kansas since 1999. We have 256 team members and 8 offices supporting 48 counties. So 48 counties we do prevention work. Only 3 counties for foster care and 1 county for transitional living. We serve 2,200 clients in Kansas in 2022. So I'm just going to walk you through some of our services and some of the things I know have been important to this committee in the past or that I heard leading up to this meeting. So I think the state and members of the committee should be really proud of our family preservation system in the state of Kansas. We have 4 providers who do a wonderful job. Just some data since I last met with you. From October to now, we're closing case rates at 85% successfully. We're keeping 97% of children out of foster care, and we have a satisfaction rate with our families of over 90%. And we serve 373 families in 2022. You heard about some evidence-based interventions earlier. We are a provider of functional family therapy and have been doing that since 2009. If you're not familiar with functional family therapy, it's really to work with those adolescent youth on a short-term in-home basis to help build healthier, more stable relationships within their family and keep them out of juvenile detention, residential, and foster care. We have a lot of success data from the last decade, but most recently an independent report by the KU School of Social Welfare of our 382 children, 95% of those remained in their TACT family 12 months after our intervention or referral. So we're working with them for 3 to 4 months, but they're sustaining in that home after our discharge. Foster care case management, we are the provider for Area 5, which is Atchison, Leavenworth, and Wyandotte counties. I'm going to scroll through some data points that you have there that I know are important. We're serving 583 kids right now, which is down 30% from when we took over the contract, which is due to a lot of different reasons, but thankful to our partner at DECA, who's the family pres provider in our area. We had 151 permanencies from July to March 27th. 162 of our 583 kids, or 28%, are legally free for adoption. Of those 162, 114 have identified adoptive resources, or 70% who are working through the legal process to finalize that adoption. Our caseload sizes are 15.75 on average across our 37 case-carrying team members. addressing the topic that just came up about failure to place or office sleepers. It will be pointed out to me if we have office sleepers, so I'm going to take the liberty to point out to you we have not had one since January 11th, 2023. It's really impossible to sort of separate the dialogue around failure to place or office sleepers from juvenile offenders. That is an interwoven conversation. So looking back at some data in preparation for today, in 2022, we had 30 office sleepers for 109 nights. Of those 30, 12 were juvenile offenders who accounted for 74 of the nights. So 40% of those failure to place accounted for 68% of the nights. I got with my team and got some data from last March. 5 incidents of assault towards our staff from foster youth, 6 incidents of damages to facilities and staff property. I'm on my last page. 2 assaults of relative placement providers, and 7 threats that were significant enough to be reported to police. So I say all this to give you some scope that we're not trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. Out of 583 kids, it's really 12 when you distill it down who are most common failure to place or monopolize the time of my staff. And I think all any of us want is the right services that are least restrictive for kids in their community. And sometimes when those kids are in foster care, that's a disservice to them and causes some issues. So to Senator Baumgartner's point that she just made, there are other people looking at failure to place. So, we're last paragraph. We're appreciative of individuals and entities that want to learn more about that too. So to that end, Cornerstones of Care hosted 3 settlement agreement plaintiff attorneys. As you know, Kansas DCF's under a settlement agreement. So we facilitated those attorneys being able to meet with my foster care director team, tour our new emergency shelter space. We arranged for them to meet privately with some of the hard to place youth who had been office sleepers. They got a list of our 7 most recent sleepers, and they're in the process of meeting with all those 7 youth in February and March, and we're helping put that together for them. Lastly, on foster homes, when I met with you last time in November, we've had a 21% increase in foster homes since that time. So, thank you.
Well done. Thank you. Thank you, Justin, and I'm sure we'll have questions. Jeanette Owens, of Chief Child Welfare Officer of DCCCA.
Chair Gossage and members of the committee, thank you for letting me be here today to speak with you. My name is Jeanette Owens, and I'm the Chief Child Welfare Officer at DECA, and I've worked there for the past 20 years. DECA serves multiple different varieties or provides multiple different varieties of services across the state of Kansas, and today I'm going to focus obviously on the child welfare services, but I did want to mention a large part of our agency also focuses on substance use disorder treatment and prevention services across the state. I'm going to start with Family Pres, and DECA has 2 of the regional contracts. We have Kansas City and Wichita regions, and the goal of that service, and I know many of you guys have heard this a lot, but the goal of that service is to keep kids safe in their homes with their families. It's a voluntary in-home support, and we utilize a lot of evidence-based processes to ensure that we're providing the best services possible. DECA specifically uses START, which stands for Sobriety, Treatment, and Recovery Teams. And what we love about this practice and have seen work so well is it's a dyad approach where we partner our case manager alongside a family mentor that works with those families that have come to the attention of the system because of parental substance use. That family mentor has lived experience in recovery and lived experience with the child welfare system. So they can come alongside those families and share both sides of, hey, you got to get this together. You want to keep your kids, as well as there's hope. Look what can be done and look where you can get to. Our current caseloads are right at assigned caseload levels. And we always point out that those caseloads vary upon needs of families. So those fluctuate throughout the year based on hotlines in different parts of the system. I'm going to move to the Child Placement Agency. That service specifically works on supporting foster parents, and we are constantly asking our foster families and our staff, how do we do more support? As you guys constantly are hearing, there's a lot that foster families do, and we always want to be able to be on the cutting edge of what else can we provide. We recently added two brand new positions to our agency that do multiple different things. The one I want to focus on today is our resource specialist, and we've had resource specialists in our family preservation programs for a very long time. But we recognized, you know what, we should be doing that for our foster families too. And so our resource specialists look across the state and nationwide for different resources we can make available more easily or more readily to our foster families. And that may be just activities, whether it's something as simple as chicken and pickle, hosting foster parents for a discounted price, or free passes to the zoo, or specific things like having fire alarms and carbon monoxide detectors available for our new foster families. That 3 minutes is fast. Okay. I can end there, or I can
just a quick wrap up.
Okay. One of the other things that I'm really excited about for our CPA, that we're coming up on a new launch date of a software system that will allow our staff to communicate with foster families on referrals. We take OCN technology that takes the referrals, puts the top 10 most important factors about those kiddos, and we can get that out through an app to our foster families that will then utilize that information to communicate with their worker on, is this a child that is going to match with my home, and can we get them there? So we're really excited about that launch. I referenced a couple of areas of needs. Both of those needs you guys have heard before. And so with that, I just want to thank you for your guys' commitment to Kansas children. Thank you.
Thank you. And third, we have Linda Bass. I always forget. Is it Bass? Boss, see?
She's the boss. Hello, Chair Gossage, Vice Chair Concannon, Ranking Member Faust-Godot, and members of the committee. My name is Linda Boss, and I'm president of KBC Kansas. I prepared for 10 minutes, and I have 3, so I'm going to be strategic, and I'm going to start with my opportunities for improvement in the child welfare system to reduce reliance on foster care. First and foremost, we need to ensure the safety of youth are assessed prior to removal. You heard in multiple testimonies today, about 37% of all removals statewide occur without the involvement of DCF, who are tasked with assessing risk and safety. So it is imperative that we move towards a system that ensures every child is assessed by the right entity prior to ever removing them from their family and creating secondary trauma. Second, we need to fully fund foster care prevention services to keep more youth safe at home, out of the foster care system, out of juvenile detention, where we know that the outcomes are very, very poor. We need to ensure that all parents and caregivers have access to needed services and supports, such as counseling and addiction services. We need to improve our system of care for high acuity youth, including those with complex behavioral health needs, such as mental illness, substance use, and developmental delays. We need to increase our investment in our child welfare workforce, both in the areas of recruitment and retention. So having shared my recommendations, I will go back and just highlight a few pieces. In my testimony in the fall, I shared this foster care report card for the state of Kansas. I provided an updated report card on the front of page 1. Please note that it is the data through the first half of the fiscal year, so those numbers will change. But first and foremost, children's safety in foster care has always been high in Kansas, and it continues to be high. And we have continued to make steady improvements statewide in reducing the number of kids in care, as well as the children being placed with someone who they know. Next, I want to point out information related to our workforce and retention, since I think this is so critical. We were asked to provide information on caseload size. We are within the DCF requirements, but further than that, we are within KBC requirements, which is a lower caseload, and that's due in large part to our high retention numbers. We have high staff retention, higher than ever, in fact. Last year, we ended the year in the high 80s, 85.8 year to date, and we are on track, 81.7, and we are at 85.8 so far this fiscal year. In my written testimony, I did provide survey results from a survey that went out this month to all of our staff, looking at the area of safety and foster care, their own safety based on the children and families that they're working with. The last 8 pages of my testimony are written direct quotes from that survey. We had 209 responses to our survey, which is a significantly higher response rate than most surveys will return. So you can tell that this is an area that our staff feel very passionate about. And I would just guide you to look at that feedback and take it all in. It's very meaningful, and we're not going to retain our workforce until we help them to feel safe and included to do their important work. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll go to Matt Stevens with St. Francis.
Good morning. Chair Gossage, Vice Chair Concannon, Ranking Member Falscadeau. I'm Matt Stevens from St. Francis Ministries. If you click the next slide. St. Francis provides a continuum of child welfare services in Kansas. And if you'll see on the slide, we really focus that work in case management work out in the western side of the state, kind of with the exception of the collar counties around Wichita. Our prevention efforts include a couple of evidence-based in-home services. I want to talk about those very briefly. Seeking Safety is an evidence-based therapeutic approach for treating and attaining safety for individuals and families suffering with trauma, substance abuse, and/or post-traumatic stress disorder. Through the last year, we have served 58 families and had 124 youth. 96 of those were able to be maintained in their home, so a really high success rate. FCT is another in-home trauma-focused family therapy model designed. And during that time, again, calendar year, we had 354 families that included 891 youth. Of those, 92% of those kids were able to be maintained at home. And so we would just ask that you continue to support any prevention efforts as they come up. So next slide. This shows a little bit about our foster care recruitment efforts. We continue to utilize things like referral bonuses, marketing campaigns, and church and community engagement. You'll see an increasingly decreased number of inquiries that have come into our work. Next slide. Our new referrals that we've received during the calendar year, we received 1,645 for out of home. About 30% of those really came from the age groups from 13 to 18. So really kind of continue to validate what Dr. Heaton said earlier. We continue to have a big number of kids come in at that age group. And if you look, in addition, on the next slide, we talk a little bit about the number of kind of the percentages that come in, what were their primary reasons for coming in. And so a lot of those primary reasons are going to be families in need of assessment versus the child abuse neglect that we would see in other places. Our permanency breakdown shows that we had 1,528 permanencies achieved last calendar year. 914 of those, or 60%, were able to be reunified with their families. And again, that's very important for us. 437 of those children were adopted, and they achieved permanency through adoption, which is good. And unfortunately, 177, or about 11% of those kids were actually aged out of the system. So how can the legislature help? Really, we want to look at anything that would help support the things that we've already heard about today. So how are we increasing access to community-based services for older youth? How are we limiting access to foster care for older youth as well? You know, the four questions that we've talked about from several different providers, we would definitely want for you guys to try to support those in any ways possible. In addition, much like KVC, and I can wrap that up very quickly, you know, we've heard about foster violence in foster homes, violence with other children. It really is imperative on us, and what KVC talked about is really how are we continuing to protect our workforce. And so we would just ask that you support any legislation that really helps protect the child welfare workforce and provides them with any additional legal protection. It's very difficult to do this work, and it's even more difficult if you're not safe, either physically or emotionally during that time. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, we have Rochelle Roosevelt and with TFI.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Rochelle Roosevelt, and I am the Senior Vice President of Permanency for TFI. And my report is really detailed, and I'm clearly not going to go into all of that ever. So I'm just going to cover some top highlights here. So first, I want to talk about our family prevention services that we have at TFI. We have the Family First Grant. This year, we've served 52 families this fiscal year in Southeast and Central Kansas. We have our Family Preservation Services in the West. We've served 227 families this fiscal year through that program. We have a number of residential programs. We have a psychiatric residential treatment program where we've served 40 children, or currently have 40 children in placement. We have 49 beds in that program, so the other beds have not been filled because of staffing capacity issues. We have a trail independent living program where we serve 9 teens currently. And then our qualified residential treatment program is currently, we suspended accepting placements for that program because we could not staff both it and our PRTF. So we moved our staff over to the PRTF, and we hope to be able to open that program back up or start accepting referrals again in July. Our child placing agency at TFI, we have 441 families currently and 524 youth placed there. 27% of the youth in those homes are both from TFI and other case management providers have been assessed to be in the high needs or to have high needs based on the client assessment. Through the case management grant, we serve areas 4 and 8. We have this year had 479 referrals with 1,272 children currently in placement. We have 539 permanencies this fiscal year so far. 54% of those have been through reunification. And our report outlines some of our successful outcomes, so I'm not going to go into those as well. Our caseload sizes are at about 22 children in out-of-home care, and we have a blended model, so our aftercare cases are also on those workers, so when you average that together, it's 27 children total. I do want to call attention to the testimony. I have some information in there about the COA standards for case management and foster care and how those work together or don't. And so I just want to call your attention to that. TFI, every time we're reviewed for reaccreditation, they review our model and decide whether or not we're meeting their standard. And to date, we have not had any correction required to meet the caseload standards. You're going to see my adoption data in there as well and some information about best interest staffings. I'd like to urge you to support the passage of House Bill 2377 to address the birth certificate issue. We have currently today 4 kids missing in Area 4 and 8, and in Area 8 we have 3 kids. I would just like to echo what Linda and Matt said about what we would like you to support. So everything they said is what I would say as well. So, and then the last thing I do want to tell you is about the worker safety. We've had 3 injuries requiring medical treatment of staff since July 1. And 4 injuries at our facilities, 3 through our case management grant. Our staff need to feel safe. They need to know that when they go to work that we've got their back and that they're not going to be, if they get hurt, that it's not just going to be passed by. Thank you so much. We appreciate our relationship with you all and with the Secretary and KDADS and DCF. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Committee, I'm sure we all have questions, so who would like to begin the question? Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was trying to catch Rochelle before she sat down. Sorry about that. Due to time, you weren't able to touch on something I'm not familiar with, and I'm new to this committee. So, criminogenic, am I saying that right?
Criminogenic, yeah.
Criminogenic behavior. Can you just briefly tell us what that is?
That really is the behavior where kids are acting in ways that might get them arrested. So physically aggressive, violent, verbally and physically assaultive. Think of a crime, and if that child's committing that behavior, that would be a criminogenic behavior.
Quick follow-up, if I may, Madam Chair. Are we seeing an increase in these types of behaviors, in the number and or severity of these behaviors?
We are seeing an increase of those kids coming into care, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, Representative Howerton.
I'll fix that in a minute. Thank you, Madam Chair. So just to follow up with Senator Erickson's, and maybe this is for Linda Boss, her question. Boss? Did I get it right? Because you're the boss. No. So you did the scorecard, which kind of prompted me into thinking all of this. Is there anybody tracking the violence that Senator Erickson just talked about? Are there numbers? Maybe that's for Secretary Howard or something. Is someone compiling all of those complaints so that we can? I know we're very data driven here. So.
Yes, we are. So we have talked as child case management providers about how we are each tracking it. We're tracking it a little different. There is a critical incident that is required as a contractor that goes to DCF, but those critical incidents are child related. So if a child is critically injured in foster care, everyone needs to know about it. When a staff member is injured because of a child in child welfare, that's not a reporting mechanisms that's needed with the state. We are each tracking it within our own organizations a little bit differently. So workers' comp is one area where we see those claims coming up. But there are a lot of incidents that don't go to workers' comp, especially those that are like involving threats of harm, but no physical attack. And that was one of the reasons that we did this survey. We wanted to know from our staff, if it didn't make it to workers' comp, what's happening. And I didn't get to testify to this, but 2/3 of our staff reported that they themselves feared for their own safety or safety of a coworker, and 17% had been physically assaulted by a child. And most of our staff have been with us, our direct care staff, for fewer than 3 years. So that's a very high number of staff who both fear for their own safety and have been assaulted while on the job. But I know each of the organizations that has presented today does track data in different ways related to worker safety.
So, Madam Chair, I don't know if what would be appropriate, but I think we need to compile those numbers. I'd like to see all that data from all the different organizations. And one more follow-up, do you track the number of social worker turnover in a case? I know we track caseloads, but there's a lot of turnover. Like one case that I know of was 5 months long and there was 6 different social workers.
Yes. Within our database, we do track by child how many workers that child and family have experienced. And so that information gets saved and it is information we could provide.
Is that something all agencies provide?
I believe I'll let them.
Is it reported
testify.
to DCF? Or?
I don't believe it's worker turnover in general is reported by child, and how many they have is not currently information that we report on, but I believe every organization could provide that information.
Okay. I think that's an important component, especially for stability for foster children, child need cares.
Yes, Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Linda, I don't know if it's for you or not with the pages of testimony. With the passage of House Bill 2021 on Wednesday, 40-0 out of the Senate, I've not made the time to look at the changes that were made in committee. And anybody can comment to this if they'd like to. Do we feel like the 2021 still has what the proponents were looking for when it went into committee as it came out of committee?
Well, I may let Rachel or someone else respond to that, because I believe there are 2 separate bills that have some version of the original language of 2021. Rachel, do you want to come in? Or
Madam Chair, would you want me to approach?
Yes, please, Rachel.
Good morning. My name is Rachel Mershon with the Children's Alliance of Kansas, and I don't have copies of either the original House Bill 2021 or the amended version in the Senate, so I'm going from memory. What I do recall is that the Senate version at this time really deleted the vast majority of HB 2021, leaving in a real new effort or a different effort to ensure that prevention dollars from the evidence-based program funds are getting into the community in some new ways, and additionally requiring the 2 agencies to collaborate together. Issues such as extended case length limits, such as to ensure that services can access by the children, and other more specific details about how the departments might work together were deleted in the Senate version. And that's general and high level and from my memory, which no one counts on all together these days.
And Madam Chair, I could speak to that as well.
And we are both on the Judiciary Committee, and thank you, Senator Baumgardner. You're welcome to speak to that from your amendment.
Yes, in fact, we did take out the length of stay. What was in the House version was to extend juveniles being detained from the 45 days to 90 days. And the concern was There were multiple concerns about that. One concern is the data indicates that extended stays for juvenile is not a quick fix. It's not a quick dip that reverses behavior. Two, there was no documentation that anyone could provide with regard to how many juveniles we were actually talking about that had been there for 45 days and had not yet received or completed services that were needed. And third, based on testimony written as well as verbal testimony that we received, part of the issue was that many of the juveniles that were being detained, they weren't able to initiate services within the 45 days. And so there was no guarantee that a child staying in for 90 days would promptly receive the necessary services. So there was very much a concern about the lack of any data being provided, and meaning that a juvenile would be in detention, not receiving the support services, and definitely losing a full semester of schooling. So that's one of the reasons. And quite frankly, the other concern was the pointed question of what would the assessment tool be for children that have not committed any crime? And the ask in the bill was that children that potentially might commit a crime be assessed to receive services. And there was not a single assessment tool that could be identified by anyone to be used on these children. So without that clear information, it was not thought out. We understand, because those of us that also serve on the Education Committee, we know that there are issues with regard to mental health and youth, primarily middle and high school kids, acting out. We know that that is an issue, but that alone is not a reason for detention. We also know that we need the judiciary to be working hand in hand, because when a youth, the examples used in committee were a juvenile that stabbed his grandmother, and the theft of a vehicle, and driving around at 2 a.m. with a stolen vehicle. That's all criminal behavior. And the judiciary absolutely has the tools to do something about criminal behavior. But what was being spoken to was not criminal behavior. And so that's why, from a Senate standpoint, we did take a very different approach from the House bill that was originally brought to us. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Baumgartner. I would also add, having served on the judiciary, that we heard compelling testimony about foster parents who felt threatened and who felt like they were concerned about the safety of the children that this juvenile coming into their home and harming other foster children and their own children. So, and I would say, Representative Owsley, just to clarify, the bill passed out of the Senate Judiciary Committee, but did not go to the floor of the Senate. It was not passed out of the Senate as a whole. Are there other questions?
Madam Chair, it did pass. It did pass out of the Senate. I believe it was unanimous. It passed out on Wednesday.
And that was 2021?
It was.
Then perhaps they just haven't. I thought the same, and then when I looked it up on the Kansas Legislature for the bill number, it does not show that it was passed by the Senate as a whole. Maybe because we did so many bills.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, and I stand corrected, Representative Owsley. I just didn't want to speak until I looked at the site. A couple of questions for me. It was mentioned House Bill 2027 on birth certificates. I've not seen that bill. Could you address that? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, that's a bill that is currently in the Child Welfare Committee. We had a hearing on it. And we also had some discussion with Secretary, and they are working on a memorandum of understanding. And so we are letting that sit for this year to see if they will. I mean, we're kind of giving them a nudge that we'd like to see that some improvement made in that area. But they are working on it. So it's not something that, I mean, it's dead for this year because it wasn't blessed. But certainly if there's nothing that gets taken up in the interim, we will address it next year.
Thank you for that clarification. We had asked for the secretary to tell us how many case managers were not social workers. So I'd like to ask that question and just by a head nod or a raise of a hand. How many of you track how many of your case managers are licensed and how many are not? So I'm seeing 2 hands at the 5. You all do. You all do. That's a requirement. So what you're saying is the secretary should already have that data that can be reported to us. You can get it to the secretary. Thank you. Committee, other questions? Yes. Representative Conk.
Thank you. That made me jump out of my chair. I had another question. So we're talking about case managers. Matt, maybe you can just answer this question. What are what's the background for the home worker? So we have that there's a worker and then there's a case manager that okay, I'll let you talk about it.
Yeah, so if we're utilizing our dyad model, so our family support worker, they would be a paraprofessional. So that would just be a high school education or some other education. But the case manager themselves go back to what Secretary Howard talked about, a 4-year degree in a human service related field.
Representative Ruiz has a clarification.
Also, no, you can have a bachelor's in social work and not be licensed. You can be a BSW. With the license, you add the LBSW.
Yes.
Representative Concanon.
Thank you. So part of this, yes. Then there's a supervisor, and that person is a social worker, right? That's over the caseworkers?
So generally, yes, there is an exception opportunity for people that have had a long career.
Okay, gotcha. And then this gets to the bottom of what I wanted to ask. How many caseworkers does that supervisor oversee, generally?
I'm going to pass to my friend.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for trying.
I'll answer for TFI. So our supervisors, when we're adequately staffed, are supposed to supervise up to 5. So 4 or 5 at max. Our model is 4. So that is our goal, is to have them supervise 4.
Okay, thank you.
One quick clarification. Don't look up a bill on your phone. When I was looking up a bill on my phone, I looked at the top and what happened in Senate committee, et cetera. But yes, it shows that. I was wondering what the vote was. And 2021 passed the Senate floor 40-0. Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Matt, I'm not going to give away my age by telling you the strength of my readers, but I could probably pick pepper out of gnat poop. But I can't read your charts. Is it? And I would love to, because I think this is really good and valuable information. Is there a way we can get this electronically? Is it available?
So it is available. I sent the PowerPoint itself electronically to Natalie, and so I think that they could get that to the group.
Perfect. I would appreciate it, because I'd really like to dive into the numbers more. Thank you.
So if you guys can't, I can, so just let me know. You got it? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Committee, other questions for the conferees? Anyone on WebEx that has a question? Natalie? Committee, we had to go fairly quickly. Do any of you have any questions for any of the other conferees that we heard from earlier today that you didn't get an opportunity to ask? Representative Underhill.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and ask you now since we have time. On your slide, page 25, you did the reduction in need of foster cares, and you talked about Gary, Johnson, Saline, and Wyandotte counties doing decreasing their need. And then you list kind of a little bit of what they're doing, but can you go into a little bit more detail of what they're doing, what we need to share with the rest of the state? And then are these changes coming locally? Are they coming from the providers? Are they coming from you? You know, because you do have those 4 counties, you have a sprawl of rural and urban. You have 4 different, providers. So what's different?
Sure. Yeah. And it's a little bit all of the above. I mean, I think probably some different answers in each county. I'd be happy to get you a little bit more detail on it. I'm not recalling some of those today. I do know that in some instances, it's the way in which locally our team is working with the courts, what some of those dialogues look like up front. Some of it is probably more so on the eastern part of the state as well. The implementation of our practice models, how we bring people around the table. They've had that in place a little bit longer on the eastern side of the state. So I'd be happy just to maybe get you a few more bullet points about each of those so you can, I do think you make a good point. I mean, it's important that we find what's like a best practice that we can translate to another jurisdiction.
If I may. Again, I know it's going out for bid, but what are the advantages of having so many catchment areas and so many different providers for different things versus having a sole provider that works very closely with your department to make sure that we're, your department's dealing with 7 different providers, 7 different systems, 7 different processes. So what are the advantages of having everybody versus just having one?
I certainly wouldn't advise having one case management provider. I think that would be difficult across the state. I think some of the advantages, and we don't have 7. We have 4 case management providers, right? We divide for purposes of data and management. We divide that into kind of 8 districts that they bid on, but we do have 4 different case management providers. I do think that it provides the opportunity to give different strains, and the case management providers today, they have greater roots in certain parts of the state. They know those parts of the state, those sorts of things, I think is a real value. I also think it gives us the opportunity to have different kinds of expertise, kind of to your last point. The different providers bring expertise in different areas. That helps us to see those things that maybe work, that then maybe become part of our expectations across the system that we put into the next RFPs. We've seen that over the 25-year history of privatization in the state. The benefit of that. But I think the local relationships, I think the different strains that each of those entities bring, and just the ability for them then to focus in a particular area. So, thank you.
I have a question for Justin with Cornerstones of Care. In your testimony, you mentioned that you provide services in 48 counties, and then you show us a chart of that. But I'm just a little bit confused about which services you provide where, because you also have, like you mentioned, area number 5. Can you clarify that for us?
Yeah, so the full testimony that I submitted to you has maps. So family preservation, we're in the East region. That's a lot of counties that runs from Nebraska down to Oklahoma. And then just the 3 counties for foster care. And then we do transitional living within Wyandotte. And then scattered across, I can do a follow-up with you with where we do it, but functional family therapy is scattered about amongst the 48 counties. So when I say we do prevention in 48 counties, that would be a combination of family preservation and functional family therapy, which are both prevention services.
Thank you. Committee additional questions? All right, we have Representative Johnson on the line.
Yes, I have a question for our host. I'd like to know why you wouldn't let me put a happy face or a laughing face on the screen. Senator Erickson's comment on glasses was the funniest thing I've heard in a long time. I don't care. That was awesome. Thank you.
I did not prevent that, I promise you, Representative Johnson. And we have a follow-up from Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is for Secretary Howard. Some of what's been shared is, once the families are involved with the judicial process, in the family's first 20 million grants that are going, $20 million worth of the grants that are going out, it indicated in that press release that just under 1.5 million is going to Kansas Legal Services. How do you anticipate that might be changing the way in which advocacy for parents and the kids to kin will change in this next year?
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that question. Kansas Legal Services is an existing partner in Families First, and we're pleased that they're going to continue. They have already had, an important impact in those circumstances where perhaps families who might come in contact with the system, maybe they need help to get a guardianship put in place, and they just need the ability to navigate so that they could provide that kind of kinship care without going formally into the system. I think that's going very well, and they'll only be able to continue to expand that work. We also have a second agreement with them based on some work that the Child Welfare Committee, that this committee had talked about during prior interims, where we also are contracting with them to do some more direct work with parents at the front end. So again, you heard some presentations on that from another state. I don't have a lot of data on that yet because that's newer, but we'd be happy to share that with the committee. I think it's really critical, which is why I think even the conversation this session about just the different roles that lawyers may play in the system, I think is really valuable. But they did a great job with the original grant, and I think the support that they're now able to provide more directly to parents we're likely to see positive impacts from that if it follows what's happened in other states.
Madam Chair, I appreciate that. I know Senator Faust-Godot has spoken out specifically about the concerns of Sedgwick County and that parents just aren't receiving that type of support on the front end. So I also share the hope that will expand so that we can get those supports to the parents, to the families, so that their children are not in the system. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Secretary Howard, if you would stay up there. I just didn't want to do all of my questions all at one time and give other people an opportunity. When we have heard this time other child welfare, Bob Bethel committees about concern for retaliation. We've also heard about nobody visited our home for 9 months. And so I'm just wondering, when a foster family shares that, does that ever come across your desk? Or is that something that goes to the providers and then you don't ever see that? How does that process work with somebody who has a complaint or a concern?
I would say it's probably a bit of both. So, we have a customer service process in our agency. I hear a lot of input from foster parents. We get letters, we get phone calls, we get concerns raised, and then we investigate each one of those. We look into what they've said. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes I think on that retaliation piece, and I do think I'm also kind of eager to hear the results from the survey that the Child Advocate did to see what we might glean from there. But we follow through on each of those. Get back with the foster parent, talk with the case management provider if that's a part of the conversation, and say in an example bill where they might say, visits didn't happen for 9 months. Well, I mean, we'll look into that. Then we'll look into the provider and are we seeing an issue of visits not taking place? And we have kind of a whole quality assurance process where we can send people in. I can think of an occasion where we sent a team in with one of our partners to look across their cases, require a corrective action plan. Again, I think that was actually partly an issue around visitation. So again, we have a pretty robust quality assurance process that looks at a lot of those pieces, but be assured we take those seriously. We also make sure that they know they have the avenue to contact the child advocate as well, should they wish to do that.
Thank you. I would like to tell those that are listening, and particularly our committee, and thank you, Madam Secretary. We at times have, at the end of we have 4 of these a year. And so oftentimes at the end of these 4 meetings, we come up with recommendations, et cetera. There was a recommendation made last year regarding what I'm going to call a baby box. That's not actually the name of that, but it's protection for an infant. We heard testimony last year about McPherson and other cities that are wanting to do this. There are no state dollars that would go for this, so it's not on the taxpayers to pay for it. It's on the community. The community can decide if it's the fire station, if it's going to be the police station. Somebody has to say, we'll set one up. It's going to cost about $10,000. Let's start fundraising for them to have enough time to get the fundraising done. We did pass that on the Senate floor this week. And I just want you to know, we listened. This was a recommendation that was made by this committee. The bill was from this committee, and it's been passed on the Senate floor. So I don't believe it's been heard on the House side yet. What has been heard on the House side? It's a House bill. Too many bills last year this past week, so forgive me. Good. Well, I almost said that and thought, no, I want to clarify. Maybe that wasn't. So yes, it was. Both came through the Health Committee, of which I chair, and then I carried that on the Senate floor. So, and I'm pretty sure that you did that as well, didn't you, Representative Concan? Representative Johnson carried that. And I want to explain also, when we talk about the House side, the Senate side, we have very different committees. So I know there were some bills that were passed from over to the Department of Health Committee, or our Health Committee, and they came from 3 different committees on the House side. So I'm thinking, okay, that was health. And then I hear, nope, that was from child welfare, from Representative Concannon's committee. And so sometimes it's a little bit different to follow certain bills and be like, wasn't that over here? Why is that in this committee? And there are various criminal committees, and we have one on the Senate side, which is Judiciary. So if you're trying to follow that, I hope that clarified a little bit. You just kind of have to look when it says committee, which committee did it go to, and then which committee is it going back to? Also, starting next week on Monday is where we will do conference committees. So chair, vice chair, and minority ranking member of the House committee and the Senate committee, who maybe there were some changes when it went back over. I expect this will happen with 2021. There were changes that were made from that House bill, and then they will come together, discuss this, talk about maybe leave it as it is. Maybe they will come up with a resolution that will say, resolution is not the right word, compromise, where maybe we take this out or we add that in. You can take a look on the Kansas Legislature website as to when these meetings will be held for conference committee. They are open to the public. You can come and sit in on those and watch those. So 2021 is one that we talked about. The House side, because it was changed, the House side would have to call the conference committee, and then the Senate would have to agree to the call. The Senate committee would have to agree to the call. Just to give you a little bit of background as to how that works. And committee, unless we have any other questions, seeing none, we are adjourned. Oh, no. I wrote it and circled it and still missed it. Committee, we do need to have a motion to approve the minutes from previous meetings. Do I have a motion?
So moved. So moved.
So moved. Do I have a second? A second from Representative Concanon and Representative Johnson. And all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? It has the amendments, the minutes have been approved, and committee, we are now adjourned.
Thank you.